Alrighty. Sorry about the delay there, folks. Thank you to everyone already turning and tuning. It begins. Thank you for everyone tuning in. This is, as longtime viewers will know, Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and this is some of the best cover art I've seen for a book ever. It's very cool. I don't exactly know what's going on in it, but it's pretty neat. Let's see. Previously on was our first installment. How was that? Huh? So yeah. So basically, the general setup is that every chapter we swap to a different character perspective, pretty much. This is going to wind up getting kind of changed a bit later. You'll know when it happens. It'll be pretty obvious. Yeah. So the narrative perspectives that we're working with are Ghostbird, the Area X generated duplicate of the Biologist from the I don't know which 12th expedition, the 12th somethingeth, the somethingeth 12th expedition. I don't remember offhand which one. One of the 12th expeditions. You've got the director slash the psychologist of that same 12th expedition. And those events, so the events of Ghostbird are happening after the events of Authority. You've got the director psychologist, who the events of which are happening before Annihilation, and then you have Saul Evans, the Lighthouse Keeper, and the events of that are happening before Area X was around. So that leads pretty well into a general sense of possible foreboding and learning more about the world in which this is all happening. And also continuing the events of Authority, which is nice. Or after they had a break in Authority. So, without further ado, we'll get cracking. Sometime. Once I find where I put my water. Where did it go? Oh, I put it somewhere smart, so I can't find it again. There we go. Excellent. Alrighty, just give me a sec here, and we'll get moving with the groovin'. Chapter 0004, The Lighthouse Keeper.
Armadillos ruining the garden, but don't really want to put out poison. Sea grape bushes must be pruned back. We'll make a list of maintenance issues by tomorrow. Fire on Failure Island, but already reported and not major. Sighted. Albatross, unidentified terns, bobcat, peering out of the palmetto grove to the east, staring at a hiker who didn't see him. Flycatcher of some kind, pod of dolphins headed east in a frenzy as they chased a school of mullet through the seagrass in the shallows.
Bodies could be beacons too, Saul knew. A lighthouse was a fixed beacon for a fixed purpose. A person was a moving one. But people still emanated light in their own way, still shone across the miles as a warning, an invitation, or even just a static signal. People opened up so they became a brightness, or they went dark. They turned their light inward sometimes, so you couldn't see it,
because they had no other choice. "That's bullshit," Charlie said during the night, when Saul expressed something similar to him after they'd had sex. "Don't ever become a poet." For once, Saul had convinced Charlie to come to the lighthouse, a rare event because Charlie still had a skittish, flighty quality to him. Beaten by his father and kicked out by his family, and in the 20 years since he'd not entirely come out of his shell. So this was a halting step forward, something that made Saul happy, that he could provide a small sense of security. "An idea in one of my father's sermons, the best he ever gave me." "The best he ever gave." Flexing his hand, trying to sense any residual discomfort from the incident with the plant. None to be found. "Ever miss it, being a preacher?" Charlie asked. "No, I'm just working out something about the Light Brigade," he said. They still elicited in him a distant but sharp alarm. What were they projecting that he couldn't see? "Oh, them, huh?" Charlie said with a simulated yawn as he turned over on his back. "You can't leave those brigaders alone, can you? Bunch of crackpots." "You too," he but said with affection. Later, when he was drifting off, Charlie murmured, "It's not stupid, the beacon thing. It's kind of a nice thought. Maybe." Maybe. Saul found it hard to tell when Charlie was sincere about such things. Sometimes their life between the sheets seemed mysterious, to have no relationship to life out in the world. Sometimes, too, other people gave you their light, and could seem to flicker, to be hardly visible at all, if no one took care of them, because they'd given you too much and had nothing left for themselves. At the end, with his church, he'd felt like a beacon that had been drained of light, except for some guttering glimmer in the heart of him, the way the words shone out from his mouth, and it almost didn't matter what light they created. Not to his congregation, because they were looking at him, not listening. At best, anyway, his ministry had been an odd assortment, attracting hippies and the straight-laced alike, because he'd pulled from the Old Testament and from deism, and the esoteric books available to him in his father's house. Something his father hadn't planned on. The bookshelves leading Saul to places the old man would rather he'd never gone. His father's library had been more liberal than the man himself. The shock of going from being the center of attention to being out of it entirely, that still pulled at Saul at unexpected times. But there had been no drama to his collapsed ministry in the North, no shocking revelation, beyond the way he would be preaching one thing and thinking another, mistaking that conflict, for the longest time, as a manifestation of his guilt for sins both real and imagined. And one awful day he'd realized, betrayed by his passion, that he was becoming the message. By the time Saul woke up, Charlie was gone, without even a note. But then, a note might have seemed sentimental, and Charlie was the kind of beacon that wouldn't allow that kind of light. In the afternoon, he saw Gloria walking up the beach, waved to her, wasn't sure she'd seen him until she corrected her course to slowly tack over. It wouldn't do to seem too interested in talking to him, he knew. Might violate some girl code. He was filling in holes from armadillos that had been rooting around in the garden. The holes, which roughly matched the shape of their snouts, amused him. He couldn't say why. But the work made him happy in a formless, motiveless way. Even better, the twins, Henry and Suzanne, were very late. It had become a stunning day after a cloudy start. The sea had an aquamarine sheen to it, vibrant against the dull shadows of submerged seaweed. At the very edge of a seamless, ever-deepening blue sky, the contrail of an airplane, showing its disdain for denizens of the forgotten coast. Much closer to home, he tried to ignore rocks slick with the white shit of cormorants. "Why don't you do something about those armadillos?" Gloria asked when she'd finally reached the lighthouse grounds. She must have meandered, distracted by the treasures to be found in the seaweed washed up on the beach. "I like armadillos," he told her. "Old Jim says they're pests." Old Jim. Sometimes he thought she made up a reference to Old Jim every time she wanted to get her way. Old Jim lived down one of the dozens of dirt roads, at the end of a maze of them, in a glorified shack near an illegal drop site for barrels of chemical waste. No one knew what he'd done before he'd washed up on the Forgotten Coast, but now he served as the ad hoc proprietor of the on-again, off-again village bar. "Is that what Jim says, huh?" Making sure to pack the soil tight, even though he was already feeling strangely tired. Another storm and he'd have eroded divots all over Whoops. Another storm and he'd have eroded divots all over instead. "They are armored rats." "Like seagulls are winged rats?" "What?" "You know, you could set traps." "They're much too smart for traps." Slowly, staring at him sideways. "I don't think that's true, Saul." When she called him Saul, he knew he might be in trouble. So why not get in a lot of trouble? Besides, he needed a break, was sweating too much. "One day," he said, leaning on the shovel, "they got in through the kitchen window by standing on top of each other and jiggling the latch." "Armadillo Pyramid!" Then, recovering her youthful caution, "I don't think that's true either." Truth was, he did like armadillos. He found them funny, bumbling yet sincere. He'd read in a nature guide that armadillos swam by walking across the bottoms of rivers and holding their breath, a detail that captivated him. "They can be a nuisance," he admitted, "so you're probably right." He knew if he didn't make some small concession, she'd drive the point into the ground. "Old Jim said you were crazy because you saw a kangaroo around here." "Maybe you need to stop hanging out with old Jim." "I wasn't. He lives in a dump. He came to see my mother." Ah, gone to see the doctor. A sense of relief came over him, or maybe it was just the cold sweat of his exertion. Not that there was anything wrong with Jim, but the thought of her roving so widely and boldly bothered him, even though Charlie had told Saul more than once that Gloria knew the area better than he did. "So, did you see a kangaroo?" My God, is this what it would have been like having kids?
"Not exactly. I saw something that looked like a kangaroo."
The locals still joked about it, but he swore he'd seen. Okay, let's try that again. I've lost the rhythm. As I spill water all over myself. Very nice. I needed a bath. Again. Where are we? Ah, here we go.
"Not exactly. I saw something that looked like a kangaroo."
The locals still joked about it, but he swore he'd seen it, just a glimpse that first year, exhilarated from the rush of exploring so many new and unfamiliar hiking trails. "Oh, but I forgot. I came over here for a reason," she said.
"Yes?"
"Old Jim said he heard on his radio that the island's on fire, and I wanted to see it better from the top of the lighthouse. The telescope?"
"What?"
Dropping his shovel.
"What do you mean the island's on fire?"
No one was over there now except members of the Light Brigade, as far as he knew, but part of his job was reporting incidents like fires. "Not the whole thing," she said. "Just part of it. Let me take a look. There's smoke and everything." So up they went, Saul insisting she take his hand, her grip strong and clammy, telling her to be careful on the steps, while wondering if he should have called someone about the fire before he confirmed it. At the top, after pulling back the lens curtain and peering through the telescope, mostly meant for stargazing, Saul discovered that she was right. The island was on fire. Or rather, the top of the ruined lighthouse was in flames, several miles away, but clear through the telescope's eye. A hint of red, but mostly dark smoke, like a funeral pyre. "Do you think anyone died?" "No one's over there, except the strange people," as Gloria had put it. "Then who set the fire?" "No one had to set it. It might have just happened." But he didn't believe that. He could see what looked like bonfires, too, black smoke rising from them. Was that part of a controlled burn? "Can I look some more?"
"Sure."
Even after he had let Gloria take his position at the telescope, Saul thought he could still see the thin fractures of smoke tendrils on the horizon, but that had to be an illusion. Strangeness was nothing new for Failure Island. If you listened to Old Jim, or some of the other locals, the myths of the Forgotten Coast had always included that island, even before the latest in a series of attempts at settlement had failed. The rough, unfinished stone and wood of the town's buildings, the island's isolation, the way the sea lanes had already begun to change while the lighthouse was under construction so long ago, had seemed to presage its ultimate fate. Presage. Its ultimate fate. The lens in his lighthouse had previously graced the ruined tower of the island, on the island. In some people's eyes, that meant some essential misfortune had followed the lens to the mainland, perhaps because of the epic story of moving the 4-ton lens, with a sudden storm come up and lightning breaking the sky, how the lens had almost sunk the ship that carried it, run aground carrying the light that might have saved it. While Gloria was still glued to the telescope, Saul noticed something odd on the floor near the base of the lens, on the side facing away from the sea. A tiny pile of glass flakes glinted against the dark wood planks. What the heck? Had the light brigade broken a bulb up here or something? Then another thought occurred, and stooping a bit, Saul pulled up the lens bag directly above the glass shavings. Sure enough, he found a fissure where the glass met the mount. It was almost like what he imagined the hole from a bullet might look like, except smaller. He examined the exit wound, as he thought of it. The hairline cracks pushing out from that space resembled the roots of a plant. He saw no other damage to that smooth fractal surface. He didn't know whether he should be angry or just add it to the list of repairs, since it wouldn't harm the functioning of the lens. Had Henry and Suzanne done this, deliberately or through some clumsiness or mistake? Unable to shake the irrational feeling of hidden connections, the sense that something had escaped from that space. The reverberation of steps below him, the sound of voices. 2 sets of footsteps, 2 voices. The Light Brigade, Henry and Suzanne. On impulse, he pulled down the lens bag, dispersed the glass flakes with his boot, which made him feel oddly complicit. When they finally appeared, Saul couldn't blame Gloria for the way she looked at them, staring like a feral cat with hackles up from her position at the telescope. He felt the same way. Henry was again dressed like he was going out on the town. Suzanne looked tense, perhaps because this time she was carrying the bulk of the equipment. "You're late," he said, unable to keep an edge of disapproval out of his voice. Henry took the handle of what looked like a metal toolkit in his left hand, was rocking it gently, back and forth. "And what's that?" Saul hadn't seen it before. "Oh, nothing, Saul," Henry said, smile as big as ever. "Just some tools, screwdrivers, that kind of thing. Like a handyman." or someone taking samples from a first-order lens that had managed to escape vandalism for more than a century. Apparently noting Gloria's hostility, Suzanne put down the suitcase and cardboard box she was carrying, leaned over the telescope as she said, "You're such a sweet kid. Would you like a lollipop?" Which she produced, as if by magic, from Gloria's ear with the over-flourish of an amateur magician. An appraising, hostile glare from Gloria. "No, we're watching the island burn." She dismissively put her eye to the telescope again. "There's a fire, yes," Henry said, unperturbed, as Suzanne returned to his side, a tinny rattle as he set his toolkit next to the other equipment. "What do you know about it?" Saul asked, although so many other questions now rose up. "What would I know about it? An unfortunate accident. I guess we never got the right badges in the Boy Scouts, yes? No one has been hurt, luckily, on this glorious day, and we'll be gone from there very soon, anyway." "Gone?" Saul, suddenly hopeful. "Closing up shop?" Henry's expression was less friendly than it had been a moment ago. "Just on the island. What we're looking for isn't there." Smug, like he enjoyed holding on to a secret that he wasn't going to share with Saul. Which rubbed Saul the wrong way, and then he was angry. "What are you looking for? Something that would make you damage the lens?" His directness made Suzanne wince. She wouldn't meet Saul's gaze. "We haven't touched the lens," Henry said. "You haven't, have you, Suzanne?" "No, we'd never touch the lens," Suzanne said, in a horrified tone of voice. The thought occurred that Suzanne was protesting too much. Saul hesitated. Should he show them the spot on the lens that had been damaged? He didn't really want to. If they'd done it, they'd just lie again. If they hadn't done it, he'd be drawing their attention to it. Nor did he want to get into an argument with Gloria around. So he relented, and with difficulty tore Gloria away from the telescope, knowing she'd been listening the whole time. Down below, in his kitchen, he called the fire department in Bleekersville, who told him they already knew about the fire on the island. It wasn't a threat to anything, and making him feel a little stupid in the process because that's how they treated people from the Forgotten Coast. Or they were just terminally bored. Gloria was sitting in a chair at the table, what is going on today? Absent-mindedly gnawing on a candy bar he'd given her. He figured she probably had wanted the lollipop. "Go home, once you've finished." He couldn't put words to it, but he wanted her far away from the lighthouse right now. Charlie would have called him irrational, emotional, said he wasn't thinking straight. But in the confluence of the fire, the lens damage, and Suzanne's strange mood, he just didn't want Gloria there. But Gloria held on to her stubbornness like it was a kind of gift she'd been given, along with the candy bar. "Saul, you're my friend," she said, "but you're not the boss of me." Matter of fact, like something he should have already known, that didn't need to be said. He wondered if Gloria's mother had said that, more than once. Wryly, he had to admit that it was true. He wasn't the boss of Henry either, or, apparently, anyone. The tedious yet true cliché came to mind. Tend to your own garden. So he nodded, admitting defeat. She was going to do whatever she wanted to do. They all would, and he would just have to put up with it. At least the weekend was approaching fast. He'd drive to Bleekersville with Charlie, check out a new place called Chipper's Star Lanes that a friend of Charlie's liked a lot. It had the miniature golf Charlie enjoyed, and he didn't mind the bowling, although what Saul liked most was that they had a liquor license and a bar in the back. Only an hour later, Henry and Suzanne were downstairs again. He noticed first the creaking of their steps, then through the kitchen window their repetitive pacing as they roved across the lighthouse grounds. He would have stayed inside and left them to it, but a few minutes later, Brad Delfino, a volunteer who sometimes helped out around the lighthouse, pulled into the driveway in his truck. Already, even before he'd come to a stop, Brad was waving to Henry, and somehow Saul didn't want Brad talking to the Light Brigade without him there. Brad was a musician in a local band who liked to drink and talked a lot, to anyone who'd listen. Sometimes he got into trouble. His spotty work at the lighthouse was what passed for community service on the Forgotten Coast. "You heard about the fire?" Brad said as Saul headed him off in the parking lot. "Yes," Saul said curtly. "I heard about it." Of course Brad knew. Why else would he have come out? Now he could see that Henry and Suzanne were ceaselessly snapping shots of every square inch of the grounds inside the fence. Adding to the chaos, Gloria had noticed him and was bounding toward him, making barking noises like she sometimes did, because she knew he hated it. "Know what's going on?" Brad asked. "Not any more than you do. Fire department says there's no problem, though." Something in his tone changed when he talked to Brad, a kind of southern twang entering, which irritated him. "Can I go up and look through the telescope anyway?" As eager as Gloria to get a peek at the only excitement going on today. But before Saul could respond to that, Henry and Suzanne bore down on them. "Photo time," Suzanne said, smiling broadly. She had a rather bulky telephoto lens attached to her camera, the wide strap around her neck making her look even more childlike. "Why do you want a photo?" Gloria asked. That was Saul's question, too. "It's for our records," Suzanne said, with a wide, devouring smile. "We're creating a photo map of the area and a record of the people who live here. And, it's just such a beautiful day." Except it was a little overcast now, the encroaching gray from the clouds that would probably rain inland, not here. "Yes, how about a photograph of you, your assistant, and the girl, I guess?" Henry said, ignoring Gloria. He was studying Saul with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I'm not so sure. I'm not sure," Saul said, reluctant if for no other reason than their insistence. He also wanted to find a way to extricate himself from Brad, who wasn't anything as formal as an assistant. "I'm sure," Gloria muttered, glaring at them. Suzanne tried to pat her head. Gloria looked at first as if she might bite that hand, then, in character, just growled and leaned away from it. Henry stepped in close to Saul. "What would a photograph of the lighthouse be without its keeper?" he asked, but it wasn't really a question. "A better picture?" "You used to be a preacher up north, I know," Henry said, "but if you're worrying about the people you left behind, don't. It's not for publication." That threw him off balance. "How do you know that?" Saul said. But Brad had gotten a kick out of this revelation, waded in before Henry could answer. "Yeah, that's Saul, man. He's a real desperado. He's wanted in 10 states. If you take his picture, it's all over for him." Did a picture really matter? Even though he'd left unfinished business up north, it wasn't like he'd fled, exactly, or as if this photo would wind up in the newspapers. The wind had taken to gusting. Rather than argue, Saul pulled his cap out of his back pocket, figured wearing it might disguise him a bit, although why did he need a disguise? An irrational thought. Probably not the first irrational thought from a lighthouse keeper on the Forgotten Coast. Say cheese. Say no secrets. Count of 3. Or is that Suzanne saying that? Whatever. No secrets? Brad had decided to assume a stoic pose that Saul supposed might be a way of poking fun at him. Gloria, seeking the dramatic, made them wait while she drew the little hood of her jacket over her head and then ran to the rocks as her protest, certain Suzanne wouldn't be able to get her in the frame. Once at the rocks, she climbed away from them, and then turned around and began to climb back, shrieking with delight and shouting, for no good reason, "I'm a monster! I'm a monster!" The count of 3 came. Suzanne groaned still and silent, bending at the knees as if she were on the deck of a ship at sea. She gave the signal. "No secrets," Brad said prematurely, with an enthusiasm he might regret, given his drug record. Then came the flash from the camera, and in the aftermath black motes drifted across the edges of Saul's vision, gathered there, lingered for longer than seemed normal. So, you know when I said that there were 3 basic character perspectives? I lied. 0005. Control. They had exploded through and up out of that terrible corridor between the world and Area X into a lack of air that had shocked Control, until the solid push of Ghostbird's body against his, the weight of his backpack pulling him down, forced him to fight against the slapping pressure of what his burning eyes, strangled throat, told him was salt water. He had managed to shut his mouth against his surprise, to ignore the rush of bubbles pushing up and around the top of his head, managed to clamp down on both his panic and his scream, to adjust well to the ripping feel of 1,000 rough smooth surfaces against him, too much like the door that had become a wall cutting through his fingers. Slashing against his arms, his legs, sure he had materialized into the middle of a tornado of shining knives. Whitby and Lowry and Grace and his mother the spy, the whole damned congregation of the Southern Reach, calling out the word "jump" through those 1,000 silvery reflections. Even as his lungs flooded with water. Even as he struggled to lose the precious knapsack but still hold on to Whitby's document inside it, grappling, flailing for the pages, some of which exploded out into the water, the rest plummeting into the murk below with the knapsack, a slab of pulp, a soggy tombstone. Ghostbird, he recognized dimly, had already shot up and past him, toward a kind of glistening yellow egg of a reflected halo that might, or might not, be the sun. While he was still sucking water among the converging circles of the many swirling knives that stared at him with flat, judgmental eyes. Confused by the swirl of pages that floated above or below, that stuck to his clothes, that came apart in miniature whirlpools to join the vortex. For a fading second, he was peering at a line of text and suffocating while blunt snouts bumped up against his chest. Only when a true Leviathan appeared did his oxygen-starved brain understand that they had emerged into a roiling school of some kind of barracuda-like fish, now being disrupted by a larger predator. There came an awful free-falling emptiness. The quickly closing space where the enormous shark had sped through the vortex, annihilating fish in a crimson cloud. A megalodon of some kind. Lowry in yet another form. The air trickling out of his mouth like a series of tiny lies about the world that had decided to extinguish him. Lowry left awful in its wake. Awful in its wake, so close to Control as he rose and it descended, that the side of his face slid half raw against its gills. The frill and flutter sharper and harder than he could have imagined as it sculpted him. The expulsion of water, a roaring, gushing piston in his ear, and the huge yet strangely delicate eye away to his left, staring into him. Then his stomach was banging into its body, his bruised waist smacked by a swipe of the tail, and his head was ringing, and the sun, whoops, skipped a line, and his head was ringing, and he was drifting, and he couldn't keep his mouth from beginning to open, the dot of the sun smaller and smaller above him. "Pick up the gun, Control," said his grandfather. "Pick it up from under the seat. Then jump." Did Lowry, or anyone, have a phrase that could save him? Consolidation of authority. There's no reward in the risk. Floating and floating. Paralysis is not a cogent analysis. Except it was. And from the wash and churn, the thrashing around him, a familiar hand grasped his drifting wrist and yanked him upward, so that he was not just a swirl of confused memory, a bruised body, a cipher, but apparently something worth saving, someone in the process of being saved. His feet had kicked out against nothing, like a hanging victim, while the fish again converged, his body buffeted by 100 smooth rough snouts as he rose, as he blacked out amid the torrent of upward plunging bodies, the rough rebuke of continuous flesh that formed one wide maw from which he might or might not escape. Then they were on the shore, and Ghostbird was kissing him for some reason. Kissing him with great gulping kisses that bruised his lips, and touching his chest, and, when he opened his eyes and looked up into her face, making him turn onto his side. Water gushed, then dribbled from him, and he had propped himself up with both arms, staring down into the wet sand, the tiny bubbles of worm tunnels as the edge of the surf brushed against his hands and receded. Lying there on his side, he could see the lighthouse in the distance. But as if she could tell his intent, Ghostbird said, "We're not going there. We're going to the island." And, just like that, he'd lost control. Now, on their 4th day in Area X, Control followed Ghostbird through the long grass, puzzled, confused, sick, tired, the nights so alive with insects it was hard to sleep against their roar and chitter. While in his thoughts, a vast, invisible blot had begun to form across the world outside of Area X, like water seeping from the bottom of a leaky glass. Worse still, the gravitational pull Ghostbird exerted over him, even as she was indifferent to him, even as they sometimes huddled together for warmth at night. The unexpected delicacy and delirium of that accidental touch. Yet her message to him, the moment he had crossed some kind of border and she'd moved away from him, had been unmistakable and absolute. So he'd retreated to thinking of himself as Control, from necessity, to try to regain some distance, some measure of the objective. To reimagine her in the interrogation room at the Southern Reach, and him watching her from behind the one-way glass. "How can you be so cheerful?" he'd asked her, after she had noted their depleted food, water, in an energetic way, then pointed out a kind of sparrow she said was extinct in the wider world, an almost religious ecstasy animating her voice. "Because I'm alive," she'd replied. "Because I'm walking through wilderness on a beautiful day." This, with a sideways glance he took to mean that she wondered if he was holding up. One that made him realize that her goals might not be his, that they might converge only to diverge, and he had to be ready for that. Echoes of field assignments gone wrong. of his mother saying, "The operational damage from an event can linger in the mind like a ghost," while he wondered if even the more banal things she had said had a hidden meaning or agenda. Or agenda. There we go. Freedom could take you farther from what you sought, not closer. Something he was learning out here, beyond any standard intel, in a wilderness he didn't understand. About as prepared for Area X, he realized, as for Ghostbird, and perhaps that was, in the end, the same thing. Because they existed alone together, walked a trail that threaded its way between reed-choked lakes that could be tar-black or as green as the reflected trees that congregated in islands among the reeds. And he was finally free to ask her anything he wanted to, but he didn't, because it didn't really matter. So, instead, he shoved his hand into his pocket from time to time, his jacket pocket from time to time, clenched his fist around his father's carving, taken from the mantel in the little house on the hill in Headley. The smooth lines of it, the way the grain of the wood under the paint threatened a splinter, soothed him. A carving of a cat, chosen to remind him of long-lost Chory, no doubt blissfully hunting rats among the bushes. So, instead, he dove, resentful at their pull, into re-examining over and over his rescued Whitby pages, the terroir pages, although they were more personal than that. An anchor, a bridge to his memory of the rest of the manuscript, lost at sea. If he used those pages to talk to Ghostbird, it was in part to bring relief or distraction from the closeness of her, and the way that the endless reeds, the fresh air, the blue sky, all conspired to make the real world remote, unimportant, a dream. When it was the most important thing. I'm probably emphasizing the wrong thing there, but we're going to roll with it. Somewhere back there, his mother was fighting for her career at Central, that act synonymous with fighting against the encroachment of Area X. Somewhere, too, new fronts had opened up, Area X expanding in ways that might not even match its prior characteristics. How could he know? Planes might be falling from the skies, this non-mission, this following of his, already a failure. Quoting Whitby's report as he remembered it, paraphrasing, had they, in fact, passed judgment without a trial, decided there could be no treaty or negotiation? That might be closer to the truth, to a kind of truth, Ghostbird replied. It was now early afternoon, and the sky had become a deeper blue, with long narrow clouds sliding across it. The marsh was alive with rustlings and birdsong. Condemned by an alien jury, Control said. Not likely. Indifference. He covers that too. Would that not be the final humbling of the human condition? That the trees and birds, the fox and the rabbit, the wolf and the deer, reach a point at which they do not even notice us as we are transformed? Another half-remembered phrasing, the real becoming half-real. But his father had never valued authenticity so much as boldness of expression. See that deer over there, beyond the canal? She's definitely noticing us. Is she noticing us, or is she noticing us? Either scenario might have horrified his mother, the spy, who had never gotten along with nature. No one in his family had, not really. He couldn't remember any real outings into the woods, just fishing around lakes and sitting by fireplaces in cabins during the winter. Had he ever been lost before? Pretend the former, since we can't do anything about the latter. Or this, Control said, or this. Or we are back in time, some creature or impulse from the past replenishing us as we grind to a halt. A stupid thing to say, Ghostbird said, unable to resist the bait. Natural places are no different than human cities. The old exists next to the new. Invasive species integrate with or push out native species. The landscape you see around you is the same as seeing an old cathedral next to a skyscraper. You don't believe this crap, do you? He gave her what he hoped was a defiant expression, one that didn't hint at how he had begun to doubt Whitby even as he continued to recite the gospel of Whitby. He had held back the quotes that might lead to something more substantial so he could think on them a little longer, contaminate them with his own opinions. I'm trying to separate out the pointless from the useful. I'm trying to make some progress as we trudge on over to the island, unable to avoid infusing the word island with venom. Grandpa Jack would have felt the same about the island, would be restless and pushing, for all the good it would have done against Ghostbird. Did any expedition ever make it to the island? She asked, Control recognizing her attempt at deflection. If they did, nothing came back to the Southern Reach about it, he said. It wasn't a priority. Perhaps too much else to wonder about. Why all the focus on the lighthouse, the topographical anomaly, and not the island? You'd have to ask the former director about that. Or you'd have to ask Lowry. I've never met Lowry, she said, as if this disproved his existence. Truth was, Lowry sounded unreal to Control when he said the name in this place. But Lowry also resisted being cast aside, disregarded, kept floating there at the edges of his vision like some majestic, demonic dust mote, manifesting every time he worried he might still be on a mission that had lodged so deep in his skull he couldn't draw it out. Unknown commands, messages, imperatives, impulses that were not his own, that could be activated by others. We think in terms of machines, not animals. The enemy doesn't acknowledge machines. He liked the word enemy. It crystallized and focused his attention more than Area X. Area X was just a phenomenon visited upon humanity, like a weather event, but an enemy created intent and focus. She laughed at machines, not animals. It definitely understands and acknowledges machines. It understands them better than we do. She stopped to face him, to lend emphasis, and something like anger pulsed out from her. Have you not understood yet that whatever's causing this can manipulate the genome, works miracles of mimicry in biology, knows what to do with molecules and membranes, can peer through things, can surveil and then withdraw? That, to it, a smartphone, say, is as basic as a flint arrowhead, that it's operating off of such refined and intricate senses that the tools we've bound ourselves with, the ways we record the universe, are probably evidence of our own primitive nature. Perhaps it doesn't even think that we have consciousness or free will, not in the ways it measures such things. If that's true, why does it pay us any attention at all? It probably extends to us the least attention possible. Is there something in the corner of your eye that you cannot get out? So we give up. We live on the island, make ourselves hats out of leaves, take bounty from the sea, build a house from the ribs of one of the leviathans from his dreams, listen to homemade dance music while drinking moonshine distilled from poisonous weeds, turn away from the real world because it doesn't exist anymore. Ignoring him, she said, A whale can injure another whale with its sonar. A whale can speak to another whale across 60 miles of ocean. A whale is as intelligent as we are, just in a way we can't quite measure or understand. Because we're these incredibly blunt instruments. That idea again. Or at least you are. Maybe she hadn't muttered that under her breath, he'd only imagined it. You sympathize with it, he said. You like it. A cheap shot that he couldn't help. Too often over the past 4 days, he had felt like he was crossing one of the dioramas from the Natural History Museum he had loved so much. Intriguing, fascinating, but not quite real, or not quite real to him. Even if the effects had not yet manifested, he was being invaded, infected, remade. Was it his fate to become a moaning creature in the reeds, and then food for worms? There was a lot about fakes in Whitby's notes, he said a little later, slyly, to test her, especially as her attention seemed elsewhere, always glued to the sky, to perhaps see just how dispassionate she could be about her own condition. With, he knew, just a sliver of payback in there, too, which he couldn't help, because it made no sense to go to the island. When she said nothing, he made up a quote, feeling guilty even as the words left his mouth. The sense in which the perfect fake becomes the thing it mimics, and this, though through some strange yet static process, reveals some truth about the world, even as it can't, by definition, be original. Still no response. No? When you meet yourself and see a double that is you, would you feel sympathy, or would the impulse be to destroy the copy, to judge it unreal, and to tear it down like any cardboard construct? Another fake, because Whitby hadn't discussed doubles, not once in the whole damn document. She stopped walking, faced him. As ever, he had trouble not looking away. Is this what you're afraid of, Control? She said it with no particular cruelty or passion. Because I could use hypnosis on you. You might be susceptible too, he said, wanting to warn her off, even as he knew there might come a time when he would need her to use hypnosis, just as she had in the tunnel leading to Area X. Take my hand. Close your eyes. It had felt as if he were continually crawling out of the mouth of a vast, inky black snake, that he could see a rasping sound from deep in its throat, and from all sides through the infinite dark bruise that encircled him, leviathans stared in at him. I'm not. But you're the double, the copy, he said, pressing. Maybe the copy doesn't have the same defenses, and you still don't know why. This much she had told him. Test me, she said, a snarl from deep in her throat. She stopped, faced him, threw down her pack. Go ahead and test me. Say it. Say the words you think will destroy me. I don't want to destroy you, he said quietly, looking away. Are you sure? She said, coming very close. He could smell her sweat, see the rise of her shoulders, the half-curled left hand. Are you sure? She repeated. Why not inoculate me if you're unsure? You're already caught between wanting me and not being sure I'm all human. Is that it? Made by the enemy. Must be the enemy, but you can't help yourself anyway. I helped you back the Southern Reach, he said. Don't thank people for doing what they're supposed to. You told me that. He took a stumbling step back. I'm out here, Ghost Bird, traveling to a place that I didn't want to go, having followed someone I'm not sure I know. A beacon to him still, and he resented that, didn't want it, couldn't help it. That's bullshit. You know exactly who I am, or you should have. You're afraid, just like me, she said, and he knew that he was. Had no defenses out here for anything. I don't think you're with the enemy, he said, enemy sounding harsh and unreasonable now. And I don't think of you as a copy, not really. Exasperation, even as she was relenting, or he thought she was. I am a copy, John, but not a perfect one. I'm not her. She's not me. Do you know what I'd say if I came face to face with her? What? I'd tell her, you made a lot of fucking mistakes. You made a lot of mistakes, and yet I love you. You're a mess and a revelation, but I can't be any of that. All I can do is work out things myself. And then, knowing her, she'd probably look at me funny and take a tissue sample from me. A roaring laughter came out of him at that. He banged his hand on his knee. You're right. You're probably right. She'd do exactly that. He sat on the ground, while she remained where she was, stiff as a sentinel. I'm beyond my skill set out here. I'm totally fucked, even if we'd gone to the lighthouse. Totally fucked, she said, smiling. Strange, isn't it? A strange place to be. Being drawn out of himself, even though he didn't want to be. Suddenly calmer than he'd been since he'd gotten here, since all of his failures muffled and indistinct behind another kind of border. She stared at him, appraising him. We should keep going, she said, but you can keep reading. She offered him a hand up, the strength of her grip as he got to his feet a greater reassurance than any words. But it's a fucking disaster, he said. I'm reading you the last will and testament of a fool. What other entertainment do we have out here? True. Control hadn't told her about Whitby's strange room, or his suspicions about Whitby as a conduit for Area X. He hadn't told her about those last desperate moments at the southern reach as the borders shifted. And in not telling Ghostbird these things, he had come to understand his mother's lies better. She had wanted to cover up the core of her decisions by hiding facts or watering them down. But she must have been wise enough to realize, no matter her motivations, no matter the labyrinth, every omission left some sign of its presence. How does it renew itself if not through our actions, our lives? Whitby asked, living on through control when the man himself was probably dead or worse. But she wasn't listening. Something in the sky had caught her attention again, something he knew couldn't be storks, and he had the binoculars this time, scrambled to find what she was staring at. When he found it, he adjusted the focus a few times, not sure he'd seen correctly. But he had. Shoot, I picked the wrong cover. Across the deepening blue, high up, something drifted that resembled ripped and tattered streamers. Long and wide and alien. Its progress so far up, so far away. Control thought of an invisible shredded plastic bag, eviscerated to elongate and drift through the sky. Except it was thicker than that, and part of the sky, too. The texture of it, the way it extended and didn't exist, the way it existed and didn't exist, made him recoil, made his hand twitch, become numb, skin cold, remembering a wall that was not a wall that had been breathing under his touch. Get down! Ghostbird said, and forced him to his knees beside her in a stand of reeds. He could feel the brightness in him now, tight, taut, pulling like it was his skin being pulled, drawn toward the sky that wasn't just the sky anymore. Drawn to it so much that he would have gotten up if Ghostbird hadn't forced him down again. He lay there, grateful for her weight beside him, grateful he wasn't out there alone. Stitching through the sky in a terrifying way, rippling, diving, rising again, and there came a terrible whispering that pierced not his ears, but all of him, as if small particles of something physical had shot through him. He cursed, frozen there, watching, afraid. The wavery lines that are there and not there. A line from Whitby's report he hadn't shared because he hadn't understood it. Images from the video of the first expedition coming back to him. Stay still, Ghostbird whispered in his ear. Stay still. She was sheltering his body with hers. She was trying to make it seem as if he wasn't there. He tried not even to breathe, to become so motionless that he was no longer alive. As it curled in and through the sky, he could hear it rippling, diving, rising again, like traces of a sail until, as he risked a look, he saw some impact of the air freeze it in place, and for a moment it was stretched as taut as skin, almost brittle, unyielding. Then, with a final plunge and ascent, coming far too close, the presence winked out of existence, or slipped out of the air, and the sky was the same as before. He had no words for it, Whitby's or his own. This was no dead diorama. This was no beastly skeleton of a man he'd never known. Anything now seemed possible. Anything could happen. He clutched the carving of Chori tight. So tight he almost punctured his skin. They remained that way until a storm slipped across a sky Control now thought of as treacherous, and through the dark gray light there came lightning, thunder, and in amongst the raindrops that drenched them, dark, slippery, tadpole-like things hurtled down and disappeared into the soil all around them, while they tried to take shelter as best they could, soaked under a gnarled, blackened copse of trees with leaves like daggers. The tadpole things were more like living rivulets, about the size of his little finger. He could not help thinking of them as coming from the stitching in the sky, that somehow had disintegrated into a million tiny pieces, and this, too, was somehow part of the ecosystem of Area X. "What do you think that will become?" he asked her. "Whatever everything else is becoming here," she said, and that was no answer at all. When the storm passed, the marsh came alive with bird song and the gurgle of water in the canals. Nothing at all amiss. Perhaps the reeds seemed more vibrant, the trees greener, but this was just the quality of the light, from a sun that seemed as distant as the rest of the world. After a time, they stood. After a time, in silence, they continued on, walking closer together than before. "0006. The Director." There's a place that as a kid you called the farthest the far That's not a word, maybe. No, maybe that's a word. There's a place that as a kid you called the farthest most point. The most distant you could get. The place that when you stood there Okay. Let's take that from the top. I'm sorry. The disintegration begins. There's a place that as a kid you called the farthest most point, the most distant you could get, the place that when you stood there you could pretend you were the only person in the world. Being there made you wary, but it also put a kind of peace into you, a sense of security. Beyond that point, in either direction, you were always returning, and are returning still. But for that moment, even now with Whitby by your side, you're so remote that there's nothing for miles. And you feel that. You feel that strongly. You've gone from being a little on edge to being a little tired, and you've come out on this perfectly still scene where the scrublands turn into wetlands, with a freshwater canal serving as a buffer to the salt marsh and, ultimately, the sea. Where once you saw otters, heard the call of curlews. Oh, where once you saw otters, heard the call of curlews. You take a deep breath and relax into the landscape. Excuse me. Walk along the shore of this lower heaven, rejuvenated by its perfect stillness. Your legs are for a time no longer tired, and you are afraid of nothing, not even Area X, and you have no room for memory or thought or anything except this moment, and this one, and the next. Soon enough, though, that feeling falls away again, and you and Whitby, survivors of the topographical anomaly, stand in the remains of your mother's cottage. It's just a floor and a couple of supporting walls with the wallpaper so faded you can't figure out the pattern. On the sunken, splintered deck, a battered and smashed rot of wide planks that used to be the walkway leads to the dunes, and from there to a metallic blue sea that tosses up whitecaps and drags them down again. Perhaps you shouldn't have come here, but you needed something like normalcy, some evocation of those days before it all went wrong, days that had seemed so ordinary at the time. "Don't forget me," Saul had said back then, as if speaking not just for him, but for your mother too, and the rest of the Forgotten Coast. Now truly forgotten, Whitby standing at one end and you at the other, needing the space. He's unsure of you, and you're definitely unsure of him. Whitby wanted to abort the mission after the tower, but at no point did you think you should just leave. This was your home, and Whitby isn't going to stop you, though he might protest, though he might whimper and try to get free, though he might plead with you to return across the border immediately. Where's your optimism now? You want to ask, but wherever he's wound up, he's still not in your world. Long ago, a fire or two was kindled on the cottage floor in what used to be the living room, under the shelter of one sagging wall. Blackened splotches left behind provide the evidence, tell you that even after Area X, people lived here for a time. Did your mother make those fires? Dead beetles litter the floor, crushed into glossy emerald pieces, teal moss and thick vines creating a chaotic green sea. Wrens and warblers hop through the underbrush outside, settle on the gaping window frame that looks out landward, then are gone again. The window you'd look through when expecting your dad to come for visits, driveway outside erased by a proliferation of bushes and weeds. Cans of food, long since rusted and rotted, along with a thick layer of soil erupting out of the corners, through the insect-chewed floorboards, what's left of them. The anomaly of cracked, ancient dishes barely recognizable, and stacked in a sink that has fallen in on itself and been transformed by mold and lichen, the cupboards below rotted away. There's a regret in you, a kind of day-mark you've let become obscured. The expeditions are never told that people had lived here, worked here, got drunk here, and played music here. People who lived in mobile homes and bungalows and lighthouses. Better not to think of people living here, of it being empty. And yet now you want someone to remember, to understand what was lost, even if it was little enough. Whitby stands there like an intruder as you explore, knows you're hiding something from him about the cottage. The flat, grim line of his mouth, the resentment in his gaze. Is it natural, or is Area X already turning him against you? When you burst out of the tower, escaping whatever had risen up with such speed, you found him still screaming, babbling about something that had attacked that had that had attacked him. Did I stutter? Yes, I did. When you burst out of the tower, escaping whatever had risen up with such speed, you found him still screaming, babbling about something that had attacked him. There wasn't any sound. Nothing. Then a wall behind me, running through me. Then it was gone. But since then he hasn't said more, nor have you shared what you saw right before you leapt up those last steps into the light. Perhaps neither thinks the other would believe. Perhaps you both just want to be back in the world first. No bodies here in the cottage, but what did you think? That you would find her huddled inside this place, cocooned from disaster somehow as the world changed around her? That was never your mother's nature. If there had been something to fight, she would have fought it. If there had been someone to help, she would have helped them. If she could have struck out for safety, she would have. In your daydreams, she held on, like you have held on, hoping for rescue. Sitting there at the Star Lanes lounge, scribbling, you found the cottage coming back to you at odd moments, along with the lighthouse. Always that riptide compulsion dragging you down into the water, that need to know, overriding the fear. The sound of the midnight waves at high tide, how from the window of your room in your mother's bungalow back then you could see the surf under the moonlight as a series of metallic blue lines, dark water squeezed between them. Sometimes those lines had been broken by her figure as she walked the beach late at night, kept awake by thoughts she never shared, her face turned away from you, as if searching even then for the answer you seek now. What is this place? Whitby asks again. Why are we here? His voice giving away his stress. You ignored him. You ignore him. You want to say, this is where I grew up. But he's endured one shock too many already, and you still have to deal with Lowry, with the Southern Reach, when you get back. If you get back. That vine-strewn shadow there, it was my room, you would tell him if you could. My parents divorced when I was 2. My dad left. He's kind of a small-time crook, and my mom raised me, except I spent the winter holidays with him every year, until I stayed with him for good because I couldn't go home anymore. And he lied to me about the reason why until I was older, which was probably the right thing to do. And I've been wondering my whole life what it would be like to come back here, to this place. Wondered what I would feel, what I would do. Sometimes even imagined there would be some message, something my mom had the foresight to put in in a metal box or under a rock, some sign, because even now I need a message, a sign. But there is nothing in the cottage, nothing you didn't already know, and there's the lighthouse at your back, laughing at you, saying, I told you so. Don't worry, we'll go home soon, you say. Just the lighthouse, and we'll go home. Saving the best for last, or the worst for last? How much of a childhood can be destroyed or twisted before the overlay replaces the memories? You push past Whitby, abruptly, because you don't want him to see that you're upset, that Area X is closing in on you all over again. The few remaining floorboards of the cottage creak and sigh, making a rough music. The birds chirp urgently in the bushes, chasing each other, spiraling up into the sky. It will rain soon, the horizon like a scowling forehead, a battering ram headed for the coast. Could they see it coming? Even Henry? Was it visible? Did it sweep over them? All you could process as a child was that your mother was dead. It had taken you years to think of her death in other ways. All you can see is the expression on Saul's face the last time you saw him as a child, and your last long look at the forgotten coast through the dusty back window of the car as you turned off the dirt road onto a paved state road, and the distant ripple of the sea passed from view. So, reveals. Um, the director is Gloria. Spoilers, I guess, if that wasn't abundantly clear. Oh, wait. No, I think I did just spoil that. Sorry. Spoilers. The director is Gloria. You probably put it together already, but here we go. They might be more explicit later, in which case, yeah, sorry. But yeah. So there's a reason I'm doing a different voice for her as a child. That will become clear later. Um, if I had it to do over again, I'd swap them, but it's too late now. Chapter 0007, The Lighthouse Keeper. 2 freighters and a Coast Guard vessel sighted last night. Something big out on the horizon. Oil tanker? There is the sea, vast and spacious, and there the ships go to and fro. Western siren still not right. Loose wire. Feeling a little sick, so visited doctor. Went on a hike late in the day. Sighted a horned owl atop a tortoise, trying to eat it. Didn't know what I was seeing. Disturbed me at first. Thought it was something odd with a feathery body and an armored stump. The owl looked up at me and just stared. Didn't fly away until I shooted off the tortoise. Acts of loving kindness. The uselessness of guilt. Sometimes Saul did miss the sermons, the cadence of them, the way he could raise the words up from within him and send them out, never severing the deep connection between them. Could name a thing, and in naming it enter so many minds. But there had come a day during his ministry when he had no words left, when he knew he was enjoying the cadence of the sentences he spoke more than the meaning. And then he was lost for a time, swimming across an endless sea of doubt, certain he had failed. Because he had failed. Hellfire and apocalyptic visions, the coming destruction of the world by demons, could not sustain a man for long without robbing him of something too. At the end, he did not know what he meant or what he believed, and so he had given it up in one prolonged shudder that cast off an entire life, and fled as far south as he could, as far remote as well. Fleeing, too, his father, who had fed off that growing cult of personality, had been at once manipulative and envious, and that had been too much to bear for long. That a man so distant, who had projected so little light, should now reveal to Saul only those emotions he did not want. Everything had shifted when he'd moved. There were ways in which he felt so different in the South than in the North, ways in which he was different because he was happier, and he didn't want to acknowledge sickness or anything that might hint at a change in what had been so ideal. Oh, wait, there was something I meant to do. My bad. There we go. Not a book cover, but auxiliary images. It's a sort of pseudo-tarot card of the S&S Brigade. Yet there was a slight numbness when he lay in bed with Charlie a week after the incident in the yard, an episode of perhaps 10 minutes during which his body seemed disconnected from him. Or the disconcerting moments on the walks he took along the coast near the lighthouse, supposedly to patrol for trespassers, but that were really just about his joy in bird watching. He would look out to sea and find things swimming in the corners of his eyes that he could not quite explain away as black sun dots. Was this paranoia or some nagging doubt, some part of his brain trying to ruin everything, wanting him to be unhappy, to force him to deny himself the life he'd made here? Next to these developments, the presence of the Light Brigade had become less and less real, and in the days since the photograph there had been a kind of truce, a mutual agreement not to accuse the other. He'd fixed the hole in the lens, cleaned up the glass, and told himself everyone deserved a second chance. But their encounters were still fraught at times. Today he had walked into his own kitchen to find Suzanne making a sandwich there without any shame or embarrassment at being found out. His ham and his cheese slices in a pile on the counter, along with his wheat bread, his onion, and a tomato from the garden. Perched on the kitchen stool at such an extreme angle, one leg straight, foot on the floor, and the other bent, Suzanne and her posture had compounded his irritation. Because it almost looked as if she was clenched there, rigid, holding a position as artificial to her as it looked to him. Henry had come in then and forestalled Saul's own questions, his lecture about not taking people's things for granted, about not making a sandwich without asking first, which seemed both invasive and ridiculously trivial later. Henry said, almost conversationally, "There isn't any spooky action here, is there, Saul? Near or far?" All that warranted was a pained smile. Everybody knew the ghost stories about the Forgotten Coast. And it's probably just a coincidence, but ever since your freak-out in the yard, our readings are off. Distorted. Sometimes it is like the equipment is junk, doesn't work, but we've tested it. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm right, am I not, Saul? His freak-out in the yard. Henry definitely was trying to get a rise out of him. "Oh, yes, it's working all right." Saul tried to sound cheery. Anyone would have thought Henry, especially, a kind of buffoon, and his stilted attempts at conversation signs of social awkwardness. But he was often unnerving to Saul, even just standing there. So he kicked them both out, called Charlie to ask him if he could have lunch, locked up his living quarters, and drove to the village bar to take a break. The village bar was an impromptu place, ad hoc style, depending on who was around. Today it was a barbecue station out back, and a cooler full of domestic beer. Paper plates from some kid's birthday party, cake with candles against a pink background. Cake with candles against a pink background. There we go. Subtle difference. Saul and Charlie sat outside, on the worn deck that faced the sea, at a table under a faded blue umbrella. They talked about Charlie's day on the boat, and a new resident who bought a house half demolished by a hurricane, and how old Jim really needed to refurbish the village bar because it's not cool to have a dive bar in a place with no decent bars to compare it to. It's not cool to have a dive bar in a place with no decent bars to compare it to. Giggling. How can you have a dive bar when there are no other decent bars? Anyway. How maybe they'd check out that rock band Charlie'd been telling him about. How maybe instead they'd just stay in bed all day. How the Light Brigade was getting on Saul's nerves. "Henry's a freak," he said to Charlie. "He's got a stare like some kind of uncanny undertaker, and Suzanne just follows him everywhere." "They can't come around forever," Charlie said. "One day they'll be gone. Little freaks. Freak Brigade." Testing out words for the fun of it, perhaps because they'd both had some beers already. "Maybe, but in the meantime they're giving me the creeps." "Could be they're undercover agents from forestry or environmental protection." "Sure, because I'm dumping chemicals all night long." Charlie was joking, but the Forgotten Coast had suffered from a decade or two of lax regulations in what was an unincorporated area. The wilderness hid its share of rotting barrels, some of them hidden on old abandoned farmsteads, half sunk into the pine loam. They took up the conversation later, at Charlie's two-room cottage just down the street. A couple of photographs of his family, some books, not much in the fridge. Nothing Charlie couldn't toss in a knapsack if he ever decided to take off or move in with someone. "Are you sure they're not escapees from an insane asylum?" Which made Saul laugh, because just the summer before, two sanitarium residents had escaped from outside of Headley and made their way down to the Forgotten Coast, managing to remain free for almost 3 weeks before being caught by police. "If you took away the insane people, no one would be left." "Except me," Charlie said. "Except me and, maybe, you." "Except the birds and the deer and the otters." "Except the hills and the lakes."
Except the snakes and the ladders.
"What?" Except by then they had so lit each other up under the sheets that they could have been saying anything, and were. It was Gloria who'd changed his mind about seeing a doctor. The next day, with Henry and Suzanne back up in the lighthouse, him down below, she appeared in the early afternoon to shadow him. He was so used to her that if she'd not shown up, he would have thought something was wrong. "You're different," Gloria said, and he chewed on that for a bit. This time she was leaning against the shed, watching him as he resodded part of the lawn. Volunteer Brad had promised to come in and help, but hadn't shown up. The sun above was a huge gob of runny yellow. The waves were a rushing vibration in his awareness, but muffled. One of his ears had been blocked since he'd woken up, no doubt because he'd slept on it funny. Maybe he was getting too old for this kind of work after all. Maybe there was a reason why lighthouse keepers had to retire at 50. "I'm a day older and wiser," he replied. "Shouldn't you be in school? Then you'd be wiser too." "Teacher work day." "Lighthouse keeper work day here," he said, grunting as he broke the soil with a shovel. His skin felt elastic, formless, and a tick under his left eye kept pulsing in and out. "Then show me how to do your work and I'll help." At that he stopped and, leaning on the shovel, took a good long look at her. If she kept growing, she might make a decent linebacker someday. "You want to become a lighthouse keeper?" "No, I want to use a shovel." "The shovel is bigger than you." "Get another one from the shed." Yes, the mighty shed which held all things. Except when it did not. He took a glance up at the lighthouse tower where the light brigade was no doubt doing unimaginable things to his beacon. "Okay," he said, and he got her a small shovel, more of a glorified spade. Shaking off his attempt at shovel instructions, she stood beside him and awkwardly scuffed bits of dirt around, while he was careful to keep well away. He'd once been smacked in the head by a shovel handle wielded by a too-close, over-enthusiastic helper. "Why are you different?" she asked, direct as ever.
"I told you, I'm not different."
A little grumpier than he'd meant to be.
"But you are," she said, ignoring his tone. "It's because of the splinter," he said, finally, to keep it simple.
"Splinters hurt, but they just make you bleed."
"Not this one," he said, putting his back into his work. "This one was different. I don't really understand it, but I'm seeing things in the corner of my eye."
"You should go to the doctor."
"I will."
"My mother's a doctor."
"So she is."
Her mother was, or had been, a pediatrician. Not quite the same thing, even if she did give unlicensed advice to residents of the Forgotten Coast. "If I was different, I'd go see her." Different. But different in what way?
"You live with her."
So?
"Why are you really here? To interrogate me?"
"You think I don't know what interrogate means, but I do," she told him, walking away. When Henry and Suzanne left for the day, Saul climbed to the top of the lighthouse and looked out onto the rich contrast of sea and beach, the deep bronze glint of afternoon sun. From this spot a light had shone out through storms and human-made disasters, in calms and in crises. Light that cascaded or even interrupted itself, light that pulsed and trembled, that pulled the darkness toward it and then cast it out. He'd been standing in the lantern room the first time he'd seen Henry, so many months ago. Henry's trudging across the sand toward the lighthouse had been a kind of travesty of progress, as he sagged and lurched and fought for purchase. Henry squinting against the glare, the wind half ripping his shirt from him, so big on him that the back of it surged left and right off his shoulders like a sail, as if mad to get free. It obscured the lagging Suzanne, whom Saul hadn't even noticed at first. The sandpipers had hardly bothered with the usual nervous pitter-patter glide away from Henry, choosing instead to poke around in the sand until the last moment, and then take wing to escape the clumsy monster. Henry had looked in that moment like an awkward supplicant, a pilgrim come to worship. They'd left most of their equipment, The metal boxes with the strange dials and readings. Almost like a threat. Squatters' rights. We will return. He didn't understand half of what he was looking at, even up close. And he didn't want to. Didn't want to know what was going on in the what was on the and he didn't want to. Didn't want to know what was on the seance side and what was on the science side. Prebiotic particles, ghost energy, mirror rooms. The lens was miraculous enough in what it could do without trying to find some further significance in it. Saul's knee was acting up, putting too much creak in his step as he went through the Light Brigade's equipment. As he searched for something he knew he probably wouldn't recognize, he was reflecting that a man could fall apart from any number of ailments, and a bit of maintenance couldn't hurt. Especially since Charlie was 7 years younger. But that just hid the thought that came now in little surges of panic, that something was wrong, that he was more and more a stranger in his own skin, that perhaps something was beginning to look out through his eyes. Infestation was a thought that crept in at moments between wakefulness and sleep, sleep and wakefulness, drifting down the passageway between the two. There was a sense of something sliding more completely into place, and the feeling confused and frightened him. Thankfully, thankfully, Gloria's mother, Trudy Jenkins, agreed to see him on short notice, about an hour before nightfall. She lived to the west, in a secluded bungalow, and Saul took his pickup truck. He parked on the dirt driveway, under oak and magnolia trees and a few palmettos. Around the corner, a deck peeked out that was almost as large as her home, and had a view of the beach. If she'd wanted to, she could have rented a room to tourists in the summers. It was rumored Trudy had come to the Forgotten Coast after plea bargaining a drug trafficking charge, this more than a decade ago. But whatever her past, she had a steady hand and a level head, and going to her was better than going to the clinic another 50 miles inland, or to the medical intern who visited the village. There. Who visited the village. I had this sliver. Another thing about Trudy was that he could talk about the sliver. He'd tried with Charlie, but for reasons he couldn't quite figure out, the more he talked about it with Charlie, the more he felt like he was somehow putting it on Charlie, and he didn't yet know how much weight Charlie could take. Thinking about that depressed him, though, and after a while he trailed off, without having mentioned the sensation of things floating at the edge of his vision. You believe something bit you? Maybe not so much a bite as so much as maybe not. Let's read half the sentence early. Maybe not a bite so much as stuck me. I had a glove on my hand, but I still shouldn't have reached down. It might not have anything to do with how I've been feeling. Yet how could he have known? The moment of sensation, non-sensation, he kept returning to. She nodded, said, I understand. It's normal to worry, what with all of the mosquito and tick-borne illnesses. So I can check your hand and arm and take your vitals and maybe put your fears to rest. She might have been a pediatrician, but she didn't speak to him as if he were a child. She just had a way of simplifying things and getting to the point that made him grateful. Your kid wanders over the lighthouse quite a bit, he said, to make conversation, as he took off his shirt and she examined him. Yeah, I know, she said. I hope she's not a problem. No, she just climbs on the rocks a lot. She's a climber, all right. Gets into everything. Could be dangerous. She gave him a sharp look. I'd rather she go to the lighthouse and be around people I know than wander off on some trail or something. Yeah, true, he said, sorry he'd brought it up. She's got a talent for identifying poop. Trudy smiled. Oh, she gets that from me. I taught her all about different kinds of poop. If a bear craps in the woods, she knows about it. She laughed at that. I think she might be a scientist when she grows up. Where is she now? He'd assumed she would have walked home right after leaving the lighthouse. Grocery store. That girl likes to walk everywhere. She might as well walk down to the grocery store and get us milk and some things for dinner. The grocery store adjacent to the village bar was pretty ad hoc, too. She calls me the defender of the light. He didn't know where that had come from, but he had liked it when she'd called him that. Mm-hmm. Back to examining him. At the end, she said, excuse me, I can't find any indication of anything abnormal on your arm or hand. I can't even find a mark. But if it's been a week, it could have faded. So, nothing? Relieved and glad he hadn't gone to Bleekersville, thinking about how much time off he had coming, and how he'd prefer to spend it with Charlie, peeling shrimp at some roadside cafe, drinking beer and playing darts, checking into a motel, careful to ask for double beds. Your blood pressure's elevated and you're running a slight fever, but that's all. Eat less salt, have more vegetables, see how you are in a few days. He felt better when he left, after having worked out a barter and money payment of $20 and a promise to hammer down some loose boards on the deck, maybe a couple of other things. But as he headed back to the lighthouse, reviewing the checklist for the lens in his mind, the relief that had invigorated him faded away, and doubt crept in. Underlying everything was the thought that he had gone to the doctor as a kind of half measure for a larger problem, that he'd only confirmed that there would be no easy diagnosis, that this wasn't as simple as a tick bite or the flu. Something told him to look back as he drove, toward Failure Island, which was a shadow to the west, appearing at that distance as if it were just a sharp curve to the coastline. A faint pulse of red light blinked on and off, too high to be coming from anything other than a container ship, but too regular to be anything but handheld or jury-rigged, but too irregular to be anything but handheld or jury-rigged. In the right location on the horizon to be coming from Failure Island, perhaps from the ruined lighthouse. Blinking out a code he didn't recognize, a message from Henry that he didn't want to receive. After he got back, he called Charlie, but there was no answer, then remembered that Charlie'd signed up for a night shift, hunting octopus and squid and flounder, the kind of adventure Charlie liked best. So he made a quick dinner, cleaned up, and then prepped the beacon. No ship traffic was expected during the night, and the weather report was for calm seas. With sunset came a premonition of beauty. The pre-dusk sky already had so many stars in it. Before he activated the lens, he sat there for a few minutes, staring up at them, at the deep blue of the sky that framed them. At such moments, he felt as if he really did live on the edge of the known world, as if he was alone, in the way he wanted to be alone, when he chose to be, and not when the world imposed it on him. Yet he could not ignore that tiny dot of pulsing light still coming from Failure Island, even overshadowed as it was by so many distant suns. Then the beam came on and obliterated it, with Saul retreating to sit on the top step to monitor the functioning of the lens for a few minutes before going back down to attend to other duties. He wasn't supposed to sleep on nights when the lighthouse lens was on, but at some point he knew that he had fallen asleep on the top step, that he was dreaming too, and that he could not wake up and should not try. So he didn't. The stars no longer shone, but flew and scuttled across the sky, and the violence of their passage did not bear scrutiny. He had the sense that something distant had come close from far away, that the stars moved in this way because now they were close enough to be seen as more than tiny points of light. He was walking toward the lighthouse along the trail, but the moon was hemorrhaging blood into its silver circle, and he knew that terrible things must have happened to Earth for the moon to be dying, to be about to fall out of the heavens. The oceans were filled with graveyards of trash and every pollutant that had ever been loosed against the natural world. Wars for scant resources had left entire countries nothing but deserts of death and suffering. Disease had spread in its legions, and life had begun to mutate into other forms, moaning and mewling in the filthy, burning remnants of once mighty cities, lit by roaring fires that crackled with the smoldering bones of strange, distorted cadavers. These bodies lay strewn across the grounds approaching the lighthouse. Visceral were their wounds, bright the red of their blood, loud the sound of their moans, as abrupt and useless as the violence they still visited upon one another. But Saul, as he walked among them, had the sense that they existed somewhere else, and it was only some hidden pull, like a celestial riptide, that drew them to manifest in that place, while the darkened tower of the lighthouse rose, shrouded in a spiral of shadow and flame. Out of this landscape Henry rose, too, at the lighthouse door, with a beatific smile on his face that kept growing larger until it curled off the edges of his jaw. Words erupted from him, but not aloud. And God said, "Let there be light." God said that, Saul, and he has come from so far away, and his home is gone, but his purpose remains. Would you deny him his new kingdom? There came with these words such a sense of sadness that Saul recoiled from them, from Henry. They spoke to all that he had put behind him. Inside the lighthouse, Saul found not stairs leading up, but a vast tunneling into the air. Okay. Inside the lighthouse, Saul found not stairs leading up, but a vast tunneling into the earth, an overwhelming spiral that wound down and down. At his back the moon had filled utterly with blood, and was plummeting to the earth, descending in the midst of a flame so hot he could feel it at his back. The dead and the dying had taken up the cry of approaching oblivion. He slammed the door shut behind him, took that sudden path traveling down, his hand trailing against an ice-cold wall, and saw the steps so very far below him, so that he was either watching himself from a great height, or his body had become as tall as the lighthouse, and each footfall occurred stories below him. But Henry remained at his side, unwanted, and the stairs were also filling with water with a great rush and growl of fury, and soon most of him was submerged, Henry's fine shirt billowing with water, while Saul still walked down, down, until his head was beneath water, taking no breath, teetering, and he opened his eyes to see the fiery green gold of words on the wall, being wrought before his eyes by an invisible scribe. Even as he knew the words came from him, even as he knew the words came from him, had always come from him, and were being emitted soundlessly from his mouth, and that he had been speaking already for a very long time, and that each word had been unraveling his brain a little more, even as each word also offered relief from the pressure in his skull, while what lay below waited for his mind to peel away entirely. A blinding white light, a plant with leaves that formed a rough circle, a splinter that was not a splinter. When he woke up, he was sitting in a chair outside the lighthouse, with no idea how he'd gotten there. The words still lived inside him, a sermon now coming out whether he wanted it to or not, whether it would destroy him or not. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner, I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms. 0008 Ghost Bird. Soon after the storm, the trail they followed wound back to the sea along a slope of staggered hills running parallel to the water. The wet ground, the memory of those dark rivulets, made the newly seeded soil seem almost mirthful. Ahead lay the green outline of the island, illumined by the dark gold light of late afternoon. Nothing had returned to haunt the sky, but now they walked through a world of broken things, of half-destroyed silhouettes against that gleaming horizon. "What happened here?" Ghostbird asked him, pretending it was his domain. Perhaps it was. Control said nothing, had said nothing for quite some time, as if he didn't trust words anymore, or had begun to cherish the answers silence gave him. But something bad had happened here. Seeking a path down to the shore that didn't require lacerating themselves on rushes and sticker cactus, they had no choice but to encounter the memory of carnage. An old tire rut filled with mud, an abandoned boot sticking out from it. Dull glint of an automatic rifle hidden by the moist grass. Evidence of fires started and then hastily put out. Tents raised and struck, then smashed apart. Clear that command and control had been shattered into pieces. "The storm didn't do this," she said. "This is old. Who were they?" Still no answer. They came to the top of a slight rise. Below lay the remains of a truck. 2 jeeps, one burned down almost to the wheels, a rocket launcher in a state of advanced decomposition. All of it gently cupped by, submerged in, moss and weeds and vines. Disturbing hints of yellowing bones amid rags of faded green uniforms. The only scent was a faint sweet tang from purple and white wildflowers nodding furious in the wind. It was peaceful. She felt at peace. Finally, Control spoke. "It couldn't be personnel trapped in Area X when it expanded, unless Area X somehow sped up the rate of decay." She smiled, grateful to hear his voice. "Yes, too old." But she was more interested in another feature of the tableau spread out before them. The beach and the land directly parallel had been subject to some catastrophic event, gouged and reworked, so that a huge rut on the shore had filled with deep water, and across the grass-fringed soil beyond lay what could be enormous drag marks, or just the effects of an accelerated erosion. She had a vision of something monstrous pulling itself ashore to attack. He pointed to the huge gouges. "What did that?" "A tornado?" "Something that came out of the sea, or what we saw in the sky?" The wind whipped a little ragged orange flag stuck via a stake into the ground near the ruined tents. "Something very angry, I'd say," she said. Curious. Down on the shore, they found a boat hidden against the... Okay. Curious. Down on the shore, they found a boat hidden against a rise of sea oats, a rowboat pulled up past the high tide mark, complete with oars. It looked as if it had been there for a long time, waiting. A commingled sadness and nervousness came over Ghostbird. Perhaps the boat had been left for the biologist to find, but instead they had found it. Or the biologist's husband had never made it to the island, and this boat was proof of that. But regardless, she could not really know what it meant, except that it offered a way across. "We have just enough time," she said. "You want to cross now?" Control said, incredulous. Perhaps it was foolish, but she didn't want to wait. They might have another hour of real light, and then that halo of shadows before true darkness dropped. That halo of shadows before true darkness dropped down upon them. "Would you rather spend the night sleeping next to skeletons?" She knew he didn't much like sleeping at all anymore, had started having hallucinations. Shooting stars became white rabbits, the sky full of them, with smudges of darkness interrupting their leaping forms. Afraid his mind was playing tricks to disguise something even more disturbing that only she could see. What if whatever did this came from the island? Throwing it back at him. What if whatever did this is somewhere behind us in the marshes? The boat's seaworthy, and there's time. You don't find it suspicious that a boat's just waiting for us? Maybe it's the first piece of good luck we've had. And if something erupts out of the water, we row back very fast. Bold moves, Ghostbird. Bold moves. But she was just as afraid, if not of the same things. By the time they cast off over that enormous, scooped-out part of the shoreline, and then past a series of sandbars, the sun had begun to set. The water was a burnished dark gold. The sky above shone a deep pink, the blue-gray of dusk encroaching at the edges. Pelicans flew overhead, while terns carved the air into sharp mathematical equations, and seagulls hovered, pushing against the wind. The slap and spray of their rowing sent little whirlpools of golden water swirling off to disappear into the reflecting current. The prow of the boat had a blunt pragmatism to it that, set against all of that light, seemed serious to Ghostbird, as if what they were doing had substance. Patterns could suffice as purpose, and the synchronicity of their rowing reassured her. They were meant to be rowing toward the island, to be here, in this place. The anxiety she felt about possibly finding the biologist and her husband on the island, of standing there and facing them, reversed or erased itself, lost, at least for a time, in the water. The long, wide swath of green that was the island at that distance was made irregular and disheveled-looking by the few tall oaks and pines that, along with the shattered spire of the lighthouse, broke through into the skyline. Trapped between the calm, motionless sky and the always restless sea, the island shimmering in the middle distance, surrounded by distortion as if it emanated heat. Sliding in between them from either side, rangy, scruffy islets with pine trees contorted low upon them, the silhouettes of these outposts extended by the rough gray-black line of oyster beds shot through with a startling iridescent white from dead shells pried open by birds. They did not speak, even when they needed a course correction slightly to the west to avoid a sudden shallows, or when a surge in the current, waves breaking over the bow, required that they row with vigor. There was just the leaky roar of his grunting, her heavy breathing, in rhythm with the motion of her oar, the slight tapping of his oar against the frame as control couldn't match the fluidity of her strokes. There was in the smell of his sweat and the brine of the water the sudden tangy smell, almost a flavor, of a sense of honest effort. The tautness she felt in her triceps, her forearms as she put her back into it. The pleasing soreness that came after, letting her know this was effort, this was real. As the light faded and the sea set, she shed in the sea shed. For the seashore. As the light faded and the sea shed its So we're doing double alliteration today. Okay. As the light faded and the sea shed its golden glitter, the rough charcoal shadow of the boat merged with the deeper blue overtaking the waves, the stained and streaked purple of the sky. With dusk, something loosened in her chest, and her rowing became even more relaxed and powerful, so that Control glanced over with a frown. She felt his gaze upon her in little appraising glances, and sometimes she turned to blunt it or neutralize it. The shattered lighthouse grew as the light deepened still further into night. Even ruined and ravaged and torn at by wind and erosion and storms, it was a beacon to them, and had a sense of life she could not ignore. There was something almost noble about it, something about the cold and the shadows of the trees, and yet this place still existing that made her both sad and proud. An unexpected feeling. Had the biologist felt this way if she had come here? Ghostbird didn't think so. The biologist would have seen everything that surrounded it first. The lesser darkness between the lines of the island and the sea had resolved into the wreckage of the dock, at a slight raised angle from the sea, so that the right half of it lay submerged, the shore to either side a human-made welter of broken concrete pilings and rocks. There was no hint of a beach until a dull off-white grin became visible along the curve of the shore farther to the west. No light came from the lighthouse, but raucous clusters of birds settling in for the night on the trees competed with the waves, their rude cries coming to her now over the wind. The trajectories of bats in the sky above seemed like something planned by a drunk navigator, their bodies obliterating stars in haphazard and unpredictable fashion. "Do you feel like someone is watching us?" she whispered. "No, I don't." His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been talking to her the whole time, some effect of the wind and the salt air. "I feel like someone is watching us. Birds, bats, trees," but said with too much dismissal. He didn't believe it was just birds, bats, trees, either. The gulping slosh under the dock as they lashed the rowboat to the pier, the lap-licking wash and retreat over the rocks below, the creak of the planks as they came up the causeway. The anonymous birds in the trees fell silent, but a throbbing series of croaks continued from various parts of the overgrown grounds of the lighthouse. Somewhere beyond that, the deliberate footfalls of some medium-sized mammal making its way through the underbrush. While above them, the pale, almost luminous, jagged spire of the lighthouse rose, framed by the dark sky and the stars arrayed around it, as if it was the center of the universe. "We'll spend the night in the lighthouse, and then forage in the morning." It was warmer here than on the sea, but still cold. She knew it could not have escaped his notice, the worn little path through the long weeds, visible by the starlight. Only regular traffic or maintenance would cause the weeds not to grow there. Control nodded, face unreadable in the darkness, and stooped to pick up a stick, brandished it. They had no guns, had long ago discarded their few modern supplies, acknowledgement of Area X's strange effects, keeping just one flashlight. Turning on that flashlight now would have felt unwise and foolish. But she had a gutting knife, and she took that out. The lighthouse door lay on the landward side, and the path led right to it. The original door was missing, but in its place leaned a massive wooden barricade that she slowly realized was the door from a stable or something similar. With some effort they moved it to the side, stood in the threshold. The inside smelled of decay and driftwood. It smelled fresher than she'd expected. She lit a match, saw, obscured by the shadows surging against the walls, that the central spiral staircase lay naked, like a giant stone corkscrew, in the middle of the ground floor, and that it ascended into a giant hole above. Unstable at best. At worst, all of it about to come down. As if reading her thoughts, Control said, "It could probably still hold our weight. They built it in such a way that the supporting walls take most of the burden. But that's pretty raw." She nodded, could see the steel rods running through it now, a skeleton that inspired a little more confidence. The match went out. She lit another. The ground floor was covered in dead leaves and a smattering of branches, a catacomb of smaller rooms hidden from view at the back. A bare concrete floor, with the scars to show that someone had ripped up the floorboards. The match went out. She thought she heard a sound. What was that? The wind? But he didn't seem certain. She lit another match. Nothing. No one. Only the wind. He sounded relieved. Should we just sleep here or explore the rooms and back? Explore. I don't want any surprises. The match went out from a gust of wind coming from the stairwell. We need to make these matches last longer, Control complained. She lit another match, screamed. Control startled beside her. A shadow sat halfway up the steps of the staircase, a rifle aimed at them. The shadow resolved into a black woman wearing army fatigues, compactly built, curly hair cut close to her head. Hello, Control, the woman said, ignoring her. Ghostbird recognized her from her first debriefing at the Southern Reach. Grace Stevenson, the assistant director. And that's probably going to do it. Let me real quick check to see how long this next chapter is, because I could reasonably fit in another chapter if it's short. It is not short. Not really. Oh, wow, this one's fairly involved. Oh, okay, this is where things start getting a little... This actually gives the one of the explanations for why she has a different voice as an adult, the director. Shoot. Oh, fudge it. If I do that, how many more installments do I have? let's check. If this reduces the number of installments I wind up doing, that'll be fine. It's installment 2, call that 3, call that 4. If I squadge that together. Oh, come on. Just find an actual chapter break, please. Thank you. Thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu. You know what? Yeah, I'm going to call it there. It's fine. It's fine. Because that, I think, winds up being 50 pages for next time, and this was... Actually, that winds up being like 60 pages. Okay, sure, whatever. Okay, so we're reading it. We're reading it. Never mind. Just give me 1 sec. I need to refill my water. I'll be right back. Alrighty. Let's see if... Let me read chat. Chat's from beginning of the stream that I am seeing now for the second time. Very good. Glad people are tuning in. Not sure I recognize Derpy Shark. I'm glad you've tuned in. And Matt, the Matt, oh boy, I am so sorry. Is it Shappy? I might be mispronouncing that. I apologize if I am. He's just Shappy. Let's go with that. Shappy. Anyway, welcome back to everyone. Sorry for the brief delay there while I reacquired fluid. Guess what? You're getting more of me. Yeah, this is going to be like a 20-page chapter, too, because this is a meaningful. Oh God, it's more than that. It's one, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Almost 20 pages. Okay. I will spoil you, and I will keep spoiling you until I can't anymore. And then I'll find another book. It's fine. So brief aside, the game plan continues to be at this point. That was a plane taking off very loudly. The game plan at this point is finish this book, and then it'll be the last installment of the Rifters trilogy, which is Behemoth Book 2, Seppuku. And then after that, probably do a bit of an interregnum of a couple weeks or a week or two, where I do short stories of varying stripes, probably something from pulps, I guess. I don't know. Astounding science fiction or interzone or something. I'll find something. And then I'll be after that we'll be doing Hyperion. The Hyperion Cantos. So before the end of this year, we'll be getting to the Hyperion Cantos. After that, it's let's see. I now have okay. There's definitely 3 body problem. That's definitely on the list. Hyperion Cantos, 3 body problem. Someone has requested Neuromancer now, so Neuromancer's on the docket. What was the other one? There's something else. There's something else, and I can't remember it, and that's really bad. I don't have these written down. It's a problem. Okay, we're not going to have this discussion now. We're just going to get back to reading. Sorry. That's post-stream, post-reading rambling. We're doing it early. I apologize. Ooh, excuse me. Jeez. (0009). The Director. Lowry's secret facility, on a dreary part of the East Coast, with gravel beaches and stark yellowing grass, had been set up on the bones of an old military base. Here Lowry has been perfecting his neurology and conditioning techniques. Some would say brainwashing. From atop a mossy hill hollowed out for his command and control, he rules a strange world of decommissioned Silver Harbor mines. Silver Harbor Mines? Silver... what? From atop a mossy hill hollowed out for his command and control, he rules a strange world of decommissioned Silver Harbor mines, lolling on the lawn below. And rusting gun emplacements for wars fought 70 years ago. I was thinking it was a mine where you mine for silver, and it's actually like ocean mines. I do not think of those as silver. So, my bad. Here Lowry has been... Let's just take this paragraph from the top because I'm lost. My bad. Lowry's secret facility, on a dreary part of the East Coast, with gravel beaches and stark yellowing grass, has been set up on the bones of an old military base. Here, Lowry has been perfecting his neurology and conditioning techniques. Some would say brainwashing. From atop a mossy hill hollowed out for his command and control, he rules a strange world of decommissioned Silver Harbor mines. Silver Harbor mines, lolling on the lawn below, and rusting gun and rusting gun emplacements, there's no A there, from wars fought 70 years ago. Lowry has had a replica of Area X's lighthouse built, and a replica of the expedition base camp, and even a hole in the ground, meant to approximate the little known about the topographical anomaly. You knew this before you were summoned, and in your imagination this false lighthouse and false base camp were foreboding, and almost supernatural in their effect. But, in truth, standing there with Lowry, looking out across his domain through a long plate of tinted glass, you feel more as if you're staring at a movie set, a collection of objects that, without the animation of Lowry's paranoia and fear, his projection of a story upon them, are inert and pathetic. No, not even a movie set, you realize. More like a seaside carnival in the winter, in the off-season, when even the beach is a poem about loneliness. How lonely is Lowry out here, surrounded by all of this? Sit down and I'll get you a drink. Very Lowry, but you don't sit and you politely decline the drink, staring out at the shore, the sea. It's a gray, crappy day, and the weather reports say it may even snow. The water has an oily quality from offshore pollution, the dull light creating rainbows across its still surface. Ah, well, I'll make you one anyway. Also very Lowry, and you're tenser than you were a moment ago. The room is narrow, and you're standing at the window, behind you a long, low, lime green couch with a steel frame covered by psychedelic orange pillows. Shaped like crude downward diving breasts, porcelain light fixtures hang in rows of 20 from a ceiling slanted to the curve of the hill. Their glow melts across the couches, tables, and wooden floor in soft overlapping circles. The whole back plate of glass sealing off the room from behind is a mirror, projecting your images and protecting you from the truth that this isn't really a lounge and you're here not by invitation, but by order. That this is an interrogation room of sorts. The refined Lowry, so unlike the uncouth Lowry, leaning forward from a chair catty-corner to the couch, has been spending a deliberate eternity prying ice cubes from a bowl on the glass table in front of you and into the glasses, one by one, clink by clink. He opens a bottle of scotch with care and, with a tap of the bottle neck against the glass, pours out 2 fingers. Lowry bent over his task, letting the moment elongate further. The mane of golden hair, now silver, grown long. The determined, solid head on a thick neck, the landmarks of features upon a face that had served him well. Craggy good looks, people say, like an astronaut or old-fashioned movie star. People who have never seen the photographs of Lowry after the first expedition into Area X, that unhydrated, unshaven face still imprinted with an encounter with the horrific unknown, Lowry gone somewhere no one else had ever gone. An honorable guy back then, charismatic and direct. Even gone to fat a little, a thickness around the stomach, he retains some charm. Even with a left eye prone to wandering as if a tiny planet is straining out of alignment, being pulled to the side by the attraction of something just out of the frame. Those bright, piercing blue eyes. One scintilla more brilliant, and all of his charisma would be wasted. The determined nose, the resolute jaw, almost a parody, like the coastline of a confident country, undermined by a stare too glacial. But there is just enough warmth in that gaze to preserve the rest of the illusion. There, done, he says, and you're nervous to the inverse of his calm and reverential care for the drinks. Lowry's replaced the bunkers hidden in the adjacent hills with secret labs, full of higher-order animals, is the ridiculous rumor, brought here to bear the brunt of Lowry's imagination, as if to punish nature for having punished him. Experiments on neurons, neural linkage, synapse control. Boring, impossible things like that. You doubt he ever brings his fourth wife here, or his children, even though the family's summer house is conveniently nearby. No tours of Daddy's workplace. You wonder what Lowry does for fun. Or maybe he's doing it now. He turns, a drink in each hand, dressed in his expensive dark blue suit, his gold-tipped dress shoes. He smiles, holds both the drinks outstretched, the motion doubled, tripled by the mirror at his back. The gleam of perfect teeth. The wide politician's smile. A dangerous smile. It's hardly even a flick of the wrist, there's such economy of motion. So compact a movement of elbow and arm that for a moment you don't realize that your drink is being thrown at you. The glass that was in his left hand smashes against the window near your head, shatters. As you recoil, sidestep, gaze never leaving Lowry, liquid splashes your shoes and splinters of glass needle your ankles. The window's bulletproof glass, reinforced. It doesn't even reverberate. The drink in Lowry's right hand isn't even trembling. But then, neither are you. Lowry's still smiling. He says, "Now that you've had your drink, maybe we can get the fuck down to it." You recline, uncomfortable against the pillows, looking out at the sea, the lighthouse, the remains of the glass of scotch on the floor. You wonder if he has them specially made so that they break easier. Lowry sits in his chair, leaning forward like a predator. You remain very still. Your heart is beating out some secret code you can't decrypt. Lowry's broad face up close, the ruddiness caused by alcohol, the abrupt lowering of the thick shoulders, the way the stomach spills onto his lap as he leans forward, his own drink still in hand. You haven't seen any sign of his staff, but you know security waits right outside the door. "So you thought you'd take a closer look, huh, Cynthia? Thought you'd use my own security codes and bypass your superiors and take a quick peek. Couldn't resist seeing what's beyond the curtain." It was a good plan. It should have worked. You should have been invisible coming back across. But Lowry had spies among the border command, had been alerted. And the best Grace could do was confiscate the materials they brought back, put them in the Southern Reach storage cathedral, mislabeled as from a prior expedition. Lowry'd had you held at the military base, top secret, before flying you up here. Whitby had been debriefed and then placed under a kind of house arrest. I already knew what was there. A gigantic snort of contempt, of disbelief. Typical desk jockey. Thinks just because they've read the reports, just because they're in charge, they know something. Said without irony. His breath is sweet, too sweet, as if something's on the verge of rotting inside him. The eyes are unstable, hostile, but otherwise his expression is unreadable. He looks like a man who, with just one more drink, is capable of almost anything. "So you saunter across and have yourselves a great little holiday. Relax on the beach, right? Once you were across, got a little kinky, thinking about being in that place with your boy toy, Whitby? Wanted a bit of Lighthouse on the lighthouse steps?" Silence is the best response. Central sees the sophisticated version of Lowry. You see the dregs, whatever he can get away with. "You've got nothing to say to me then? Nothing? No annotation? No further explanation?" I turned in my report. He's half up out of his seat at that, but you don't move at all. Even at the age of 9 on the Forgotten Coast, you knew better than to run from a bear or wild dog. You stand your ground, face them down, maybe even growl. Would you have done the same when the rules changed, when it became Area X? You don't know. You're sweating under all those ridiculous lights. I'm trying to get inside your head without getting inside your head, if you know what I mean, Lowry says. I'm trying to understand how we got here. Trying to see if there's a good fucking reason I shouldn't just let Central fire you. The central egg, opening up like a mouth to issue an order to make you spontaneously combust, or, more likely, evaporate like mist. But this means Lowry's the main reason you haven't been fired yet, which gives you back a sense of hope. I couldn't keep sending in expeditions under my orders without going myself. You couldn't let them be the only ones to have the experience. Your orders? My orders, not your orders. You get that straight. He slams his glass down on the table between you. An ice cube escapes, slides across the surface onto the floor. You resist the urge to pick it up, put it back in his glass. And Whitby, you just had to recruit him for your sad little expedition, too? You could reveal that Whitby wanted to go, but you can't predict how Lowry would react. Whitby's always been beyond Lowry, a fundamental misunderstanding between tragically different life forms. I didn't want to go alone. I needed backup. I'm your backup, and involving the assistant director in all of this. Was that a good idea, too? That was a good idea, too? Sorry. Grace might hate Lowry, but for some reason Lowry half-liked Grace, which, if she ever found out, would disgust her. None of it was a good idea. It was a lapse in judgment, but it's hard to send men into battle without keep going into battle yourself. Grace's idea for a defense. Keep it simple. Keep it old school. Cut the bullshit. Did Grace suggest you say that? I bet she did. Have you missed a bug this time around, or is this just a guess? Again, you've got our reports. Lowry is the only one who does have them. The Army's Border Command knows this, but Grace has concealed it from the Southern Reach, at Lowry's request, for reasons of morale and security clearance, pending a final decision. Officially, you're still taking a very long vacation, and Whitby's on administrative leave. Fuck your reports. You're trying to hide Whitby from me. Not strictly true. And your findings seem flimsy, incomplete. You were in there almost 3 weeks and your report is 4 pages long? Nothing that unusual happened, considering. Considering bullshit. What did Whitby see? Something real or just another fucking hallucination? Do you understand what could have happened by going out there? By going there? Do you understand what you could have stirred up? What you could have stirred up? The words coming out of his mouth slur together, so it sounds like stirrups. I understand. A toy lighthouse suddenly coming to life. Lowry leaning in then, lurching in, to whisper, in a miasma of that sweet, rotting breath. You want to know what's funny? What's so fucking funny? No. Here it comes. As if he's somebody's gramps at a holiday gathering. The same story, almost every time. Back in the day, back then you got it all wrong. If you'd fessed up to the old SR during the interview, the kicker is they might have taken you anyway. You might have gotten hired. They might have done it, knowing the old director. True, maybe a sick kind of fascination attached, like with some special intelligent lab animal, a special, particularly magnificent white rabbit, say. True, you'd never have made director, but fuck, that job sucks, right? As you're finding out. As you're going to keep finding out. Problem now, though, is the deception's gone on too long. So what the hell do we do? The problem, from your point of view, is less the past than the present. The time when you could somehow have tried to contain Lowry or influence him is long gone. As soon as he descended to Central, been canonized, you couldn't touch him. That person, The person you'd been back before SR had been careful, so careful trying to get to the point where you could do something reckless like cross the border into Area X. Your father had been paranoid about the government. Every once in a while took on something shady to supplement the day job as a part-time bartender, a low-level grifter. He didn't want any involvement. He didn't want any trouble. So he kept the government out of it, didn't tell you your mother was probably dead and that you weren't going back to the Forgotten Coast ever again until he absolutely had to. Told you to give vague answers to the men who came to interview you about your mother. It would be better for your mother that way. Anything to avoid a light shining on his business ventures.
You don't know this because you're too young, came the usual lecture. But politicians run all the big scams. Government's the thief of all time. That's why it tries so hard to catch thieves. It doesn't like the competition. You don't want that on your back your whole life just because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
When he did tell you that she was gone, you cried for a month, even as that look on your father's face, the gruff warning, the way everything in your constantly moving household operated on caution, indoctrinated you in the merits of silence. Over time, your memory of your mother faded, in the way of not knowing if an image or moment was something you'd experienced or seen going through the photographs your dad kept in a shoebox in the closet. Not in the way of keeping something close rather than pushing it away. You would stare at pictures of your mother, on the deck with friends, a drink in her hand, or on the beach with your dad, and imagine that she was the one saying, "Don't forget me." Feel ashamed when it was the Lighthouse Keeper's face that kept coming back to you. Tentative, and then with more determination, you started your own investigation. You learned there was something called the Southern Reach, devoted to cleaning up the environmental devastation in what had been the Forgotten Coast and was now Area X. Your scrapbook grew so fat it was hard to open, filled with clippings from books, newspapers, magazines, and, later, websites. Conspiracy theories dominated, or speculative recastings of the government's official story. The truth always something vague and out of focus that had nothing to do with what you'd seen, with the sense you'd had of the Lighthouse Keeper becoming different. In your first year of college, you realized that you wanted to work for the Southern Reach, no matter what their role, and, with your grifter's sense of the truth, that your past would be a liability. So you changed your name, hired a private investigator to help you hide the rest, and went on to pursue a degree. Cognitive psychology, focused on perceptual psychology, with a minor in organizational psychology as well. You married a man you never really loved for a variety of reasons, divorced him 15 months later, and spent close to 5 years working as a consultant, applying and reapplying to Central with application form answers tailor-made to give you a shot at the Southern Reach. The director at the time, a Navy man, loved by all but not hard enough by far, hadn't interviewed you. Lowry had, still at the Southern Reach back then and with his own agenda. He liked to acquire his power sideways. There had been the formal meeting in his office, and then you'd gone out to the edge of the courtyard and had a different kind of interview.
"We can't be overheard out here,"
he'd said, and alarm bells had gone off. Irrational thoughts that he was going to proposition you, like some of Dad's friends. Something beyond his polite demeanor, his well-made clothes, his air of authority, must have warned you. But Lowry had something more long-term in mind.
"I had my own people check you out. It was a good effort there, all that work to disguise yourself. A solid B for effort, all of that, sure. Not bad at all, considering. But I still found out, and that means Central would have too, if I hadn't covered up your tracks. What was left of them."
A broad smile, a genial manner. You could have been talking about sports or the swamp sweltering there in front of you, seeming to simmer in its own thick broth. You cut to the important bit. "Are you going to turn me in?" Throat dry, it seeming hotter than it had a moment before. Memories of your father being taken off to jail for petty fraud, always with the bravado of a smile and a blown kiss, as if the point, after all, was to get caught, to have an audience, to be noticed. A chuckle from Lowry, and you intimidated, and, a chuckle from Lowry, and you intimidated by what struck you back then as his sophistication, despite his failings. His verve, the way he filled out the suit, and the way his face reflected experience, like he'd seen what you wanted to see, been where you'd wanted to be.
Turn you in, Gloria? I mean, Cynthia. Turn you in? To whom? The guys in charge of keeping track of fake names and false identities? The Forgotten Coast truthers? No, I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to turn you into anyone.
The unspoken thought, I'm going to keep you all for myself. What do you want? You asked, thankful for once that being your father's daughter meant sometimes you could cut right through the bullshit.
Want?
Disingenuous to the core.
Nothing. Nothing yet, anyway. In fact, it's all about you, Cynthia. I'm going to walk back in there with you and recommend you for the job. And if you pass training at Central, then we'll see. As for all the rest of it, that'll be just our secret. Not really a little secret, but a secret.
Why would you do that? Incredulous, not sure you had heard right. With a wink.
Oh, I only really trust people who've been to Area X, even pre-Area X.
At first, the price wasn't so bad. All he wanted, off the record, told to him, all he wanted, off the record, told to him and him alone, was an account of your last days on the Forgotten Coast. The Lighthouse Keeper, the Seance and Science Brigade.
Describe the man and the woman,
He said, meaning Henry and Suzanne, and all of his questions about the SNSB sounded as if you were filling in pieces of some story he'd already heard part of before. Within months, the favors asked for and reluctantly given multiplied. Support for this or that initiative or recommendation, and when you had more influence, to push against certain things, to be less than enthusiastic, to stall. Mostly, you realize, on certain committees connected to the science division, to undermine or curtail Central's influence within the Southern Reach. All of it clever and by degrees, so that you didn't really notice the escalation until you were so mired in it that it was just part of your job. Eventually, Lowry supported your bid to become director. Coming to the Southern Reach had been like being allowed to listen to the heartbeat of a mysterious beast. But as director, you came even closer. Terrifyingly closer, trapped within the chamber walls, needing time to adjust. Time exploited by Lowry, of course. Tossed onto the table, the latest satellite footage from above Area X, images from on high reduced to 8.5 by 11 glossies. Glamour shots of an inexhaustible resource. This blank mimicry of the normal, marred only by the blurs you might expect to find on photos taken by ghost hunters. Definitive proof of a change, this blurring. As if somehow the Southern Reach is losing the ability to see even the lie.
Evil advances with good, but these terms have no meaning in Area X, or to Area X. So why should they always apply to us in pursuit of an enemy to whom they go unrecognized? An indifferent context deserves equal indifference from us, if we want to survive.
You're not expected to answer, Lowry taking a break to philosophize as he fills up his drink for a second time. Nor would you know what to answer, for you would never characterize Lowry as indifferent, or as expressing indifference through his actions. As ever, this is part of the deception, the ability to convey authority by instilling in others his own confidence. Lowry's already threatened to put you under hypnosis, but the one thing you have resolved, having lived on the outskirts of Lowry's experiments, is that you will never allow him that. Always hoping that Lowry must have limits, can't be untouchable, can't operate without some constraint from above. Surely every action he takes reveals something about his motives to someone somewhere with the power to intervene. So you're at what appears to be an impasse. Then he surprises you. I want you to meet someone else who has a stake in this, someone you know already. Jackie Severance. Not a name you expected to hear. But there she is, escorted in by Mary Phillips, one of Lowry's assistants, through the mirror door to your side of the glass. Severance, oblivious to the way her heels are crunching broken glass, dressed as impeccably as always, still addicted to scarves. Has she been listening the whole time? The dynastic successor to the legendary Jack Severance. Jackie, about 15 years removed from her last stint with the Southern Reach, a bright star still shining in the firmament of Central's personal cosmology, despite a dark star of a sun in the service that she's had to rescue more than once. Lowry the outlaw and Severance the insider seem unlikely allies. One's holding the silver egg in her hand and petting it. The other is trying to smash it with an invisible hammer. What's the play here? Does Lowry hold something over her, or does she hold something over Lowry? Jackie is going to be my advisor on this situation. She's going to be involved from now on. And before we make a final decision on what to do with you, I want you to repeat for her everything that's in the report. Everything that happened to you across the border. One last time. Severance smiles the way a crocodile smiles, and sits on the couch next to you while Lowry shuffles off to make her a drink. Nothing too formal, Cynthia. Nothing you need to prep, and in no particular order. You can tell it in whatever order you like. That's kind of you, Jackie. It's not kind. It's just an attempt to get a different version, which makes this a ritual of sorts, with a preordained outcome. So you go back over it all again with Severance, who stops you from time to time with questions blunter than you expect, coming from someone you've always thought of as a political animal. You didn't go anywhere else? No shortcuts or other excursions? Excursions? It's easy to omit what doesn't seem relevant. The same flat smile. You don't bother to answer. Did you bring anything back with you? Just the usual recovery along the way of past expedition equipment, as happens with many expeditions. The story you and Whitby have decided on, because you want to hold on to the plant and the phone, test them at the Southern Reach, not have them taken by Central. You're the experts, not Central. What sense did you get of the journals in the lighthouse? Was there an impression or idea you had about them, seeing them all like that? If that's not too vague. No particular sense or impression or idea, you tell her. They were just journals. Because you don't want to go there, don't yet want to relive the end of your trip, the things that happened in the lighthouse. And nothing there seemed unusual or out of order? No. You're selling the simpler story of danger in the tunnel. Later, leaning in, conspiratorial, just you girls, Gloria, Cynthia, why'd you do it? Really? As if Lowry's not in the room. You shrug, give a pained smile. At the end of your account, Severance smiles and says, It's possible that we'll file this under Never Happened and move on. And if so, you have Lowry to thank. A hand on your arm, though, as if to say, Don't forget I helped. You get to keep Whitby, too, she says, if Whitby passes a psych eval you personally help conduct at Central, off the books. But you are vouching for him. You are responsible for him. Like you're a child asking to keep a pet. The new border commander will be hand-picked by Lowry and report to both Lowry and Severance, and they will institute procedures so that, as Lowry puts it, you and Whitby and any other son of a bitch stupid enough to try another jailbreak thinks twice. A few useless pleasantries, and Jackie's left the room as fast as she got there. The encounter's so brief, you wonder why else she's here, what other business she has with Lowry. Has she walked into a trap, or has Lowry? Trying to remember the exact date when Severance came to the Southern Reach, going through a list of her tasks, her duties, and where she was when. Thinking that there is some part of the puzzle you can't see, that you need to see. Lowry, there at the center of his secret headquarters, overlooking the sea as snow in thick flakes begins to cover the glass. Cover the grass, the sea mines, the little paths. With the geese and seagulls that will never care about Lowry's plan or your own huddled by the fake lighthouse, as deceived by it as the expeditions have. Okay, let's try this paragraph from the tippity top. Lowry, there at the center of his secret headquarters, overlooking the sea as snow in thick flakes begins to cover the grass, the sea mines, the little paths. With the geese and the seagulls that will never care about Lowry's plans or your own, huddled by the fake lighthouse, as deceived by it as the expeditions have been by the real one. But Severance is out there now, walking by the rocks, staring across the water. She's on her phone, but Lowry doesn't see her, just his own reflection, and she's trapped there, within his outline. Lowry, pumping himself up, pacing in front of the glass, smacking his chest with one hand. And what I want is this. The next expedition, they don't go to Central. They come here. They receive their training here. You want Area X to react? You want something to change? I'll change it. I'll coil things so far up inside Area X's brain, things that'll have a sting in the tail. That'll draw blood. That'll fucking make the enemy know we're the resistance, that we're onto them. Some trails go cold fast. Some trails take a long time to pick up and follow. Seeing Severance walking along the ridge of black rocks near the lighthouse, even a fake lighthouse, raises your hackles, makes you want to say, "That is mine, not yours." Lowry's still standing over you and ranting about what will happen and how it's going to happen. Of course he wants more control. Of course he is going to get it. But now you know too what you've only guessed at before. Beneath Lowry's bluster, he feels that your fates are intertwined, that he's more bound to you than ever. That he's more bound to you than ever. Whatever. We'll get emphasis on the right syllable right someday. I promise. Not in this book, sorry. Jeff VanderMeer's particularly prosaic and flowery way of writing things makes that almost impossible for me. I don't know why. Um, After 6 months, you will be able to return to the Southern Reach. No one there will know why you were gone so long, and Grace won't tell them. Promises she'll have pushed them so hard in the interim that they won't have time to think about it. While you wait out your suspension at home, you have this image in your head of Grace as a tall, stern black woman in a white lab coat and the tri-cornered hat of a general, holding a saber at arm's length, for some reason standing in the prow of a rowboat, crossing a strategically important river. When it's time for her to drop the hat, get rid of the boat, cede control back to you, how will she feel about that? Single Oh, okay. I don't know how to read. Single dim thought most nights after a doctor's appointment or buying groceries for dinner. Which world am I really living in? The one in which you can hear Whitby's screams in the lighthouse intermingling with the screams from the first expedition? Or the one in which you're putting cans of soup in the cupboard? Can you exist in both? Do you want to? When Grace calls to ask how your day is going, should you say, same as usual? Or awful, like conducting autopsies over and over again for no reason? Sitting on a stool at the bar at Chipper's, in the bar at Chipper's, that's the same, isn't it, after you come back? Perhaps even more so, given you have more time to spend there. The realtor's around a lot, too. She talks all the time about a trip up north to visit her family, about a movie she saw, about local politics. Sometimes the veteran with the perpetual beer in hand dredges up a long ago memory of his kids, trying to be part of the conversation. As the realtor and the drunk talk past and through you, you're nodding as if you know what they're talking about, as if you can relate, when all you can see now are two images of the lighthouse keeper superimposed, saying the same thing at different times, to two different versions of you. One in darkness and one in light.
You're thinking of your own children, aren't you? Says the realtor. I can tell.
Your mind must have wandered. The mask must have slipped. Yes, you're right, you say. Sure. You have another beer. Start to tell the realtor all about your kids, where they go to school, how you wish you saw them more often, that they're studying to be doctors, that you hope to see them around the holidays, that they seem to belong to a different world now that they're all grown up. The veteran, standing at the end of the bar, staring past the realtor at you, has a strange look on his face, a look of recognition, as if he knows what you're doing. Hell, maybe you should play some songs on the jukebox, too. Maybe go take a turn at karaoke later. Have a few more beers. Make up a few more details of your life. Only, the realtor left at some point, and it's just you and the veteran and some people trickling in late who you don't know, won't ever know. The floor is sticky, dark with old stains. The bottles behind the bar have water cooler cups over them to keep the fruit flies out. There's a sheen off the bar top that's not entirely natural. Behind you, the lanes are dark and faded heavens. Oh. Behind you, the lanes are dark, and the faded heavens have risen again, unimaginable wonders across the ceiling, some of them requiring a moment to recognize. Because the other world always bleeds into this one. Because no matter how you try to keep what happened at the lighthouse between you and Whitby, you know it will leak out eventually, in some form. Will have consequences. At the lighthouse. Whitby had wandered, and you were still drifting through the downstairs when you realized you couldn't hear him moving around in the next room anymore. In the stillness and the dust, and the light through the broken front door. Oh boy. At the lighthouse, Whitby had wandered, and you were still drifting through the downstairs when you realized that you couldn't hear him moving around in the next room anymore. In the stillness and the dust, the way the light through the broken door made the darkness murky, you expected to find him standing in a corner, a figure luminous in shadow. But soon enough you realized he'd gone up the lighthouse stairs, headed for the very top. There came the sounds of fighting and the splintering of wood. One voice rising above the other, both curiously similar, and how could there be a second voice at all? So you followed fast, and as you climbed there was both a doubling and a dissonance, for in memory the steps had been much wider, the trek much longer, the space inside the lighthouse conveying a kind of weightlessness, the walls once painted white, the windows open to receive the sky, the scent of cut grass brought by Saul. But in the darkness, worried about Whitby, you had become a giant, or the lighthouse had become lost or diminished, not just undone by time, but contracting, like the spiraling fossil of a shell, leading you to a place no longer familiar, erasing with each step what you thought you knew. At the top, you discovered Whitby down in the watchroom, panting like an animal, his clothes torn and blood on his hands, and the strange impression that the edges of the journals were rippling, enveloping Whitby, trying to drown him. No one else there, just Whitby, with an impossible story of encountering his doppelganger, false Whitby, on the landing, chasing him up to the lantern room, until they had fallen through the open trap door into the mound of journals, off balance and awkward. The smell of them, the bulk of them, the feel of them around real Whitby and false Whitby as they toiled in their essential opposition, now in and now out of the light, coming through the open trap-door. How to verify this story of not one but two Whitbys? Not Whitby punching himself, kicking himself, biting himself, awash in flapping paper, but doing this to another version. His wounds were inconclusive. But the tableau fascinates you, returns to you during your 6 months off, even while chopping onions for chili in your kitchen or mowing the lawn. Sometimes you try to imagine what it would have been like if you had arrived earlier, not in the aftermath, and stopped there, at the top of the steps, peering down into that space, unable to move, watching the two Whitbys struggle. You can almost believe that Whitby birthed Whitby, that in exploring Area X, something in Whitby's own nature created this paradox, with one version, one collection of impulses, thoughts, and opinions, trying, once and for all, to exterminate the other. Until two pale hands reach out to choke one pale throat, and two faces stare at each other, inches apart, the face above deformed by a paroxysm of rage, while the face below remains calm, so calm, surrounded by the ripped and crumpled journals. The white paper with the red line of the margin, the blue lines to write on. The pages and pages of sometimes incomprehensible handwritten text. All of those journals without names but only functions noted, and sometimes not even that, as if Area X has snuck in its own accounts. Are they shifting and settling as if something huge sleeps beneath them, breathing in and out? Is that a glow surrounding them, or surrounding Whitby? The Whitbys. The Whitbys. Until there is the crack of a neck, of a spine, and the Whitby pinned against the mound goes slack, and his head lolls to the side, and the Whitby atop him, frozen, emits a kind of defeated sob, and slides off dead Whitby, awkwardly manages to wriggle and roll his way free, and sits there in the corner, staring at his own corpse. Then, and only then, are you drawn to wonder whether your Whitby won, and who this other Whitby might have been, who in death would have seemed preternaturally calm, face smooth and unwrinkled, eyes wide and staring, only the angle of the body suggesting that some violence has been perpetrated upon it. Afterward, you forced Whitby to come out of that space, to take some air by the railing, to look out on that gorgeous, unknowable landscape. You pointed out old haunts disguised as your exhaustive encyclopedic knowledge of the forgotten coast. Whitby saying something to you, urgently, but you not really hearing him. You more intent on filling up the space between with your own script, your own interpretation, either to calm Whitby or to negate his experience, to forget about the mound of journals, a thing you don't want to consider for too long, that you put out of your mind because isn't that the way of things? To ignore the unreal so it doesn't become more real. On the way down, you searched for dead Whitby, but he still wasn't anywhere. You may never know the truth. But in what Whitby swore was dead Whitby's backpack, you found two curious items, a strange plant and a damaged cell phone. And with that, we are actually going to call it. Thanks to everyone who tuned in, and gosh, it looks like there was quite a few of you over time. As always, I stream this starting at about noonish Eastern Standard Time every Friday on Free Read Fridays. where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. In this case, we've just gotten done reading a chunk of Acceptance by Jeff VanderMeer, the third and now not so final installment of the Area X/Southern Reach trilogy. Thanks to everyone who tuned in live. As always, these are, and where most people are probably going to listen to them/see them, these are up on YouTube. I will get the playlists sorted probably tomorrow, my time, so this weekend. Other than that, yeah, see y'all next time. Hope people are digging it. This was much stronger and less yawny and miserable than last week. I'm sorry about that. I'm not really sure what was going on there. I had gotten plenty of sleep. I don't know. Anyway, that'll do it for me for today. And, well, it looks like it's actually a cool day for once. Nice.
It's been hot. Been hot up here.
Oh man, Lowry's voice just absolutely shredding my vocal cords. I don't know what I was doing wrong there. Anyway, thanks again to everybody who tuned in. See you all next time. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. All right, that's me. Done. See y'all next time. Bye.